Chapter 917. The first plan is to synthesize a bloodline. Bloodline Harmonizer Potion. At this stage of the Magus world's development, research on bloodline innate abilities had reached the pinnacle. However, most of the research was monopolized and blocked by large Magus organizations, so the outside world did not know about it. However, this only applied to low-ranked magi. Grade 3 magi like Grimm already had too many ways to come into contact with this taboo information. Forget the three major Magus organizations. Even the scattered forest of towers in the central part of the continent had many Magus organizations and organizations famous for synthesizing bloodlines. For example, the Horrible family in the Thousand Needle Forest, the Guletta family in the White Valley River, the Cordwain family in the Floating Port. Relying on their rich knowledge of bloodline synthesis, these families had nurtured many famous and powerful magi and were powerful organizations in their respective regions. However, synthesizing bloodlines was not the right path. The more powerful creatures' bloodlines one fused with, the more powerful the synthesizer would be, and the lower their potential for development would be. Almost all people who synthesize bloodlines faced a thorny problem, and that was losing the ability to advance. Want to advance? Sure, the only way was to fuse with a more powerful, more outstanding bloodline. If they could not find it or collect it, their strength would not improve at all. Once they set foot on the path of synthesizing bloodlines, it meant that they could only walk further and further down this rugged path with no chance of turning back. That was until they made themselves look neither like humans nor ghosts. The strange bloodlines in their bodies also made them lose the ability to give birth to normal bloodline descendants. It was said that the descendants of people who synthesized bloodlines were all monsters without exception. The Magus world was able to find so many strange beasts, mutants, and corrupted beasts. This was definitely thanks to these bloodline synthesizers. In order to reduce the many side effects of synthesizing bloodlines, these bloodline magi could only take bloodline harmonizer potions regularly to ease the conflict between their chaotic bloodlines. Hence, the AI. Chip's first suggestion was to buy a batch of bloodline harmonizer potions to ease the internal conflict between the fire dragon bloodline and Meryl's innate elemental talent. However, this way, Meryl could mutate into a strange creature that was half human, half dragon. This was probably how the Dragonborn had been obtained. Grimm was clearly not interested in this plan. What was so powerful about the fire dragon bloodline? His strength lay in his sturdy body and magic resistance, as well as his natural affinity with the fire element. What was so great about human sorcerers? His strength lay in his wisdom and profound knowledge, as well as his unparalleled intelligence. If this kind of fusion would damage Meryl's intelligence, then the value of the fusion would plummet. Rather than transforming Meryl into a half-human, half-dragon monster, it would be more efficient to keep the female fire dragon as a magical pet. Therefore, after some simple consideration, Grimm quickly gave up on this bloodline fusion plan. The second option, bloodline devouring, using the fire dragon bloodline to completely replace Meryl's origin bloodline, allowing one to devour the other and form a new stable bloodline inheritance. Advantage: Meryl can perfectly inherit the inheritance of the rank 3 fire dragon. Disadvantage: Meryl will deviate from the Magus faction and lean towards the dragon bloodline. This plan did not meet Grimm's ideal requirements either. He did not want to kill Felaba and create another she-dragon named Meryl. The path of the Magus could not be abandoned. The third option, bloodline blessing, used the fire dragon bloodline to gradually modify Meryl's body, allowing her to gradually adapt and accept the fire dragon bloodline. This will create a balance between the human body and the fire dragon bloodline. Finally, the foreign bloodline will fuse with the host in the form of a spell blessing. For this type of bloodline blessing, refer to the information on dragon bloodline warlocks. Grimm narrowed his eyes and could not help but start to seriously consider the spell blessing. He was actually the most familiar with this method. This was because Grimm's current life form belonged to the category of bloodline blessing. He had a human body and related talents, but to a large extent, he had also experienced the dual elemental transformation of his flesh and spirit. It could be said that if Grimm was willing to abandon the last bit of his human body, he could easily transform into a fire elemental creature. However, if he did that, his body would be rejected by the Magus world, and he could only end up in a foreign plane similar to the fire elemental plane. Therefore, Grimm still had a human body and a wizard bloodline, and the fire elemental transformation was just one of his witchcraft skills. Although this would reduce the power of the fire elemental spell, it allowed him to retain the most precious part of a magus. From this point of view, it was understandable for Meryl to walk on the path of bloodline blessing. After making up his mind, Grimm quickly formulated a series of bloodline modification plans for Meryl. In the first week, Meryl became a big eater. She ate every 4 hours, and every time, she needed to eat 15 kilograms of fire dragon meat. By the end of the day, Grimm had forced Meryl to eat fire dragon meat several times her own weight. The fire dragon's meat had obviously been specially prepared by Grimm. It had been soaked in a witchcraft liquid. Apart from improving Meryl's ability to absorb and refine the essence of the fire element, it could also increase her affinity with the fire element. Grimm had mixed the few remaining fire elemental essences into the potion, and they became food for Meryl's stomach. All Meryl had to do every day was meditate crazily to speed up the absorption of the fire elemental essence in the fire dragon meat. Often, before the fire dragon meat was completely digested, the next meal had already begun. Every time, Meryl's face would turn ashen as she looked at the fire dragon meat that had been cut into large chunks. She would use her death-defying spirit to open her mouth wide and stab her throat with a table knife. Even if she choked to the point that her eyes rolled back, she would straighten her neck and swallow it. The rich essence of fire contained in the fire dragon's steak kept leaking out, turning her skin fiery red. The violent and ferocious particles of fire elements rampaged in her body, smashing her original earth element circulation system into pieces. She was in an indescribably miserable state. Just like that, Meryl was tortured by Grimm's crazy eating plan for 7 whole days before she successfully entered the second stage. It had to be said that although Grimm's plan was a little crazy and inhumane, the changes it brought to Meryl's body were obvious. Before eating, there was no sign of fire elemental affinity in Meryl's body at all. After eating, however, her fire elemental affinity jumped to become Meryl's second highest affinity attribute, almost on par with her earth elemental affinity. In the second stage, Grimm modified Meryl's bloodline. He cut open her chest and made a small incision in her heart. He then sealed the fire dragon bloodline rune and transplanted it into her heart. This kind of surgery was a walk in the park for wizards, and it couldn't be any easier. After the transplanting, Grimm took out a bottle of weakened moon water and slowly poured it into Meryl's abdomen. As the emerald primary life fluid washed over her heart, the incision on her beating heart quickly healed. Meryl's chest did not need to be stitched up. She simply pieced the flesh back together and washed it with moon water. After the blood had dispersed, a smooth, flat skin was revealed. There was no anesthesia during the entire operation. Meryl calmly watched the whole process with the help of a water mirror. After the operation, Grimm placed his hand on Meryl's chest and silently sensed the bloodline runes sealed in her heart. He then asked softly, "Are you ready?" Meryl gritted her teeth and nodded. "Don't worry, teacher. I'm ready." "Good," Grimm answered. He drew a line in the air with his finger and condensed a rune made of crimson flames. He then slowly entered Meryl's body. Under the influence of the flame rune, the seal on the bloodline rune in Meryl's heart loosened a little. Some of the aura of the fire dragon bloodline seeped out and was quickly absorbed by Meryl's rapidly beating heart. Meryl, who had been calm just a moment ago, was now covered in blood. Her skin was covered in spots of blood that had seeped out from the agitation of her blood. Her slender and naked body suddenly arched up high, and she opened her mouth to spit out a thin, bright yellow flame. In an instant, the flame essence from the fire dragon bloodline had caused her blood to boil and most of her organs to be half-cooked. Grimm stretched out his right hand and made a grabbing motion. The flame rune floated out, and even the restless bloodline rune in Meryl's heart calmed down. Meryl groaned in pain. She picked up a bottle of healing potion and gulped it down. She then closed her eyes and waited for her organs to recover. Thousands of wounds gradually recovered under the stimulation and repair of the healing potion. However, the terrible pain of being burned by flames was deeply etched into Meryl's mind and soul. After a quarter of an hour, Meryl felt that her body and mind had calmed down. She then opened her eyes and nodded firmly at Grimm. As a result, the flame rune entered her body once more, causing the bloodline runes to become restless once more. Meryl's suppressed and painful roars lingered in the laboratory for a long time. Her naked body was as red as a rose, and her skin was covered in large drops of sweat. Although there was a buffer for the first time, the burning pain that spread throughout her limbs and bones still deeply tormented Meryl. Her delicate body curled into a ball. The pain caused her muscles to spasm and her entire body to tremble. Her hoarse screams echoed in the secret chamber for a long time. This time, it took Meryl a quarter of an hour to barely regain her composure. She stole a glance at the flaming rune floating in front of her, and her eyes were filled with fear and cowering. However, the thought of becoming stronger was obviously more attractive to Meryl than the pain. Thus, after barely calming down, Meryl gritted her teeth and nodded at her teacher. Chapter 9:18. The path of a wizard was never one that could be completed in one go. If you want to take a shortcut, you had to pay a heavy price, which was often unbearable for ordinary people. And now, Meryl was suffering inhumanly for her past laziness and indulgence. Great power had to be supported by a strong body, and the reason why dragons were so large was precisely because they could bear the burden of a powerful bloodline. It was just that dragons relied on years and years of sleep to digest and absorb the power of this bloodline. Meryl, on the other hand, wanted to fuse with the bloodline rune in such a short period of time, and it was inevitable that she would suffer a little. Unless she could be like a dragon and seal herself in a certain place, using a long period of meditation to get through this cruel transformation process. For an entire month, Meryl had been on the border between heaven and hell at all times. One foot was life, the other was death, and she had been tormented and struggling between life and death. At the very beginning, the slightest bit of fire dragon aura that leaked out from the bloodline rune was enough to cook her flesh and boil her blood. Later, the accumulated fire essence that she had absorbed earlier was slowly released from her limbs and bones, and it began to passively transform and modulate her body's vital circulation system. First, it was her heart. Under the transformation of the fire dragon aura, this vital organ gradually swelled up and became strong. It was clearly very difficult for a human heart to withstand the impact of such a massive fire dragon aura, so two small auxiliary hearts unexpectedly grew out behind Meryl's heart. As they worked together to absorb and filter the fire dragon aura, it no longer destroyed her body as it had in the past, and instead became the source of the powerful bloodline power that slowly pulsed. Meryl's vital organs and blood vessels also became tougher and denser than before, and she now had Ajwa's fire resistance attribute. There were even some inexplicable changes in her flesh and blood, and they became more suitable for the circulation and storage of fire energy. During this period, Meryl's body also showed some signs of turning into a dragon. Every time she consciously gathered fire energy, a layer of fine dark red scales would appear on the surface of her body, which clanked when she struck it. When Meryl gathered the flame energy on her palm, her delicate, fair hand would transform into a solid dragon claw covered in dark red dragon scales. She could easily pierce through alloy shields with a defense of less than 100 degrees and crush rocks in a fine powder. This meant that Meryl's strength and physique had been greatly enhanced after her dragonization. Therefore, when Meryl had completely adapted to the bloodline runes and was able to use the flame energy, Grimm gave her another comprehensive dialysis. Meryl, Tier 1 Advanced Class, Bloodline Sorcerer, Fire Dragon Transformation, basic data: strength 16, constitution 17, agility 9, spirit 17. It had to be said that the transformation of her bloodline had brought about an earth-shattering change in her strength. Strength increased from 4 to 16 points. Vitality increased from 8 to 17 points. Agility increased from 5 to 9 points. Spirit increased from 14 to 17 points. The increase in the basic stats of the body was amazing. If Meryl was said to be an ordinary Tier 1 sorcerer before, not even worthy of the title of a veteran sorcerer, her current strength had already caught up to those elite sorcerers. In terms of physique, she was no longer any weaker than elite sorcerers. The only difference was probably in her combat skills and the casting of spells. However, this was only the result of her initial fusion with the bloodline runes. In the future, as her fusion with the bloodline runes increased, her basic strength would increase by leaps and bounds. When that time came, she would only need to put in a little effort to easily crush those elite sorcerers of the same rank. It was a pity that Meryl's compatibility with the Fire Dragon's bloodline was still slightly lacking. At Tier 1, she could only complete the dragonization of part of her body, be it Dragon Scale Protection, Fire Dragon Breath, or Bloodline Suppression. All of these were pretty good defensive and combat skills. As for the complete dragonization, she would probably have to wait until she reached Tier 2. With a solid foundation laid by the Tier 3 Mother Fire Dragon, Meryl's path to Tier 2 had already been paved. All she needed to do now was to fuse and absorb the bloodline runes, slowly waiting for her strength to cross the threshold of Tier 2. From this point of view, Meryl's advancement to Tier 2 was much easier than everyone else's. From this, it could be seen that with a powerful sorcerer backing her up, her path to advancement would be much smoother. This was also one of the main reasons why most low-rank sorcerers were willing to follow the orders of high-rank sorcerers. In just 5 months, Meryl had successfully completed the transformation of the Fire Dragon's bloodline and successfully fused with the bloodline runes. All sorts of hidden benefits would be repaid to her over the next decade or so, pushing her back into the ranks of the Crimson family's second echelon. This was the generous reward that her legendary teacher, the Crimson family's leader, had given her for her years of hard work in serving the family. Of course, Grimm had also used this opportunity to successfully collect the bloodline transformation data he wanted. Magus World, White Tower. The light from the teleportation slowly dissipated, and Meryl opened her eyes with a smile on her face. The transformation of her bloodline had brought her many hidden benefits. Even the dizziness caused by long-distance teleportation was much shorter than before. For this teleportation, Meryl had purposely chosen the public teleportation circle at the teleportation plaza outside the White Tower. Hence, when she stepped out of the teleportation circle, the Magi guarding the edge of the teleportation circle hurriedly bowed in greeting. The Magi and acolytes at the edge of the teleportation plaza also stopped in astonishment and made way for her, greeting her politely. It had been half a year since there was any news of Magus Meryl. The White Tower's rumor was that Magus Meryl was conducting a large-scale spell experiment, so she was temporarily not receiving any outsiders. Her authority had also been replaced by the Destiny Witch's chef. The Magi and acolytes living in the White Tower were the most sensitive to these minute changes. However, the higher-ups of the Crimson family had always maintained their silence, so none of the Magi dared to question Meryl's decision. Perhaps the acolytes did not feel much when they suddenly saw Magus Meryl today, but the Magi from the Crimson family were all shocked. They could not believe their eyes and their spiritual senses. Every Magus elemental aura and spiritual wave were unique, with a different frequency and amplitude. However, this Magus Meryl in front of them was still the same person, but her elemental aura and spiritual wave had undergone earth-shattering changes. Moreover, in just half a year, Magus Meryl's body had also undergone a huge change. She had become taller and more muscular. In the past, Meryl was only about 7 meters tall, but now she was almost 2 meters tall. Her light blue eyes had now become dark red, and the edge of her eyes seemed to be shining with the light of flames. Every time their eyes met, the Crimson Magi would feel a stinging pain in their eyeballs, as well as a slight burning sensation. As for the acolytes, they did not even dare to look directly at the gentle and beautiful Magus of the past. Otherwise, their eyes would definitely be filled with tears, and they would not be able to open their eyes. What struck everyone the most was the faint spiritual pressure that shrouded Meryl's body, causing everyone who approached her to feel their hearts thumping wildly. The acolytes were not knowledgeable and did not know what this was, but the Crimson Magi could clearly sense it. Dragon's Might? This was a weakened version of Dragon's Might. Since when did Meryl have the spiritual pressure to imitate Dragon's Might? This is unbelievable. Meryl walked into the White Tower with a relaxed gait, then slowly flew toward the higher levels of the Wizard's Pagoda on a floating metal disc. News of her return quickly spread throughout the tower, including Witch Chave, who was sitting in the Wizard's Hall on the 7th floor, and Count Winlier, who was bowing to the side. Chave waved her hand to disperse the water mirror in front of her, and a cold smile appeared on her icy, beautiful face. Your old master is showing off to me. Looks like her bloodline modification at her teacher's place is quite successful. Count Winlier, who was standing to the side, still had a fawning smile on his face, but his words did not budge an inch. I will only ever have one master, and that is Lady Mary. Witch Chave was slightly stunned, knowing that she had said something indiscreet. Lady Mary was one of the top bosses in the Crimson family. Other than her terrifying level 3 strength, she had a large number of level 2 vampires under her command. Even though Chave belonged to the line of Destiny Witches and was not under the control of the Crimson family, she still had to maintain a respectful tone and attitude towards such a powerful person. This was also the wizard code that all low-level magi had to follow, or else the other party would have sufficient excuses to punish her. Even though she was not interested in the authority of the White Tower, nor was she interested in participating in the internal affairs of the Crimson family, Chave could not remain calm about the changes that had occurred to Wizard Meryl. The Crimson family and the Destiny Witches were working closely together, and the increase in strength of either side could tilt the balance that was barely maintained. The fact that both Grimm and Mary had reached Tier 3 at the same time was a huge blow to the Destiny Witches. If the Crimson family had a few more powerful magi, the balance between the two sides would be even more difficult to maintain. Hence, when the Snow Witch Shefu saw Meryl's successful return, she did not feel happy for her at all. Instead, she felt a strong sense of defeat and danger from the depths of her heart. Chapter 919. Meryl's strength had greatly increased, and she had successfully returned. This news spread like wildfire around the White Tower. The current White Tower was no longer the lonely Magus Tower of the past. It encompassed the White Tower, Doffland City, Musant City, and 3 ice towns. Its territory covered an area of 300 kilometers, and its citizens numbered 27,000. However, the number of citizens was not as high as it seemed. More than 5,000 of them were green-skinned goblins from the Goblin Plain. However, the fact that they could purchase a ticket to teleport from the Goblin Plain to the Magus world was enough to show the wealth and strength of these goblins. They were either the regional supervisor of a large financial magnate, or they had made outstanding contributions to the city and were recommended here. No matter which one it was, their arrival had greatly increased the prosperity of the businesses around the White Tower. This had also indirectly supported more citizens of the White Tower. Unlike the citizens who were more concerned about the stability of the White Tower's ruler, the Magi who resided in the White Tower were more concerned about the reason for Meryl's sudden increase in strength. They were not fools, and the traces of bloodline modification in Meryl's body could not be hidden from them. Thus, in private, the rumor that the Crimson family had already grasped a set of safe and perfect bloodline modification technology was everywhere. Although the scattered towers still maintained a high pressure on the research of bloodlines, all the Magi's private research had more or less touched on the area of bloodlines. Thus, the higher-ups of the scattered forest of pagodas turned a blind eye to this situation. as long as it did not cause a large-scale bloodline mutation and affect the mortal kingdoms. They could not be bothered to investigate and punish them one by one. As for the powerful Magus families or organizations, they all had their own unique research on bloodline modification. Although these magi who had undergone bloodline modification or bloodline synthesis would lose a portion of their potential, it was still a method to rapidly increase the family strength. Moreover, there were only a few people who had extraordinary talent and the confidence to become stronger step by step. Most of the Magi community were those with ordinary talent and could only stay at rank 1 or 2 for their entire lives. It was already extremely fortunate for them to be able to successfully advance to stage 1. Every step further was a thrilling and arduous task. If there was a shortcut that could allow them to smoothly advance to level 2 and give them another 2 to 300 years of life, how many of them would care about a mere severing of their development potential? It had to be said that Grimm's path of advancement was too smooth. He had a completely wrong understanding of how difficult it was to advance as a wizard. He had no idea how much of an attraction an imperfect bloodline would have for those low and mid-ranked magi who thirsted for more power and authority. For a low-ranked sorcerer who had been stuck in the ranks of rank 1 sorcerers for 100 to 200 years and had almost reached the end of their lifespan, they were unwilling to give up any hope of advancing. As for negative factors such as bloodline backlash and the loss of potential, they didn't care at all. This could be seen from the first wizard Anderson that Grimm met. In order to advance, in order to increase his strength, Anderson had even used a blood sacrifice method that had severe side effects. From this, it could be seen how crazy Wizard Anderson was in order to advance. Therefore, once the rumor that the family might have a set of bloodline modification techniques or methods spread, it immediately caused a commotion among the Crimson Sorcerers. The low-ranked sorcerers who thought it would be difficult to advance with their own strength immediately felt a new hope. They began to inquire about information related to bloodline research within the family. As the first example, Meryl instantly became the focus of everyone's attention. Her every move and every step of her progress was observed and observed by those who were observant. From this, they could estimate the progress of the Crimson family's research on bloodlines. It had to be said that Meryl's bloodline modification was very successful. The powerful fire dragon's aura constantly nourished and strengthened her body and bloodline, causing her basic stats to continuously rise. Although she did not use any methods to strengthen her body, Meryl, who was once a weak female sorcerer, had a powerful body that was not weaker than any rank 1 body refinement sorcerer. Just in terms of strength and vitality, many professional body refinement sorcerers could not even reach her current body quality. This undoubtedly made those body refinement sorcerers feel extremely ashamed and resentful. After a long period of observation, many Crimson sorcerers could finally confirm that Meryl had fused with a fire dragon's bloodline. Moreover, from the increase in strength, it could be estimated that the fire dragon's strength was not lower than rank 2. This also meant that Meryl only needed 10 to 20 years of accumulation to successfully advance to rank 2 sorcerer. To most sorcerers, this was undoubtedly a great stimulation. Finally, this news began to spread from the bottom to the top, and finally reached the ears of Grimm, who had been living in seclusion. Bloodline modification with severe side effects was actually so popular among low-rank sorcerers. Truth be told, Grimm could not believe his ears when he first heard this news. The side effects were very severe. Alright, they really did not seem to care. In the sorcerer community, the difference in status between a rank 2 sorcerer and a rank 1 sorcerer was like heaven and earth, not to mention the continuation of life force. Hence, most rank 1 sorcerers would put all their hopes on bloodline modification after trying all sorts of methods and giving up all hope. However, even the simplest bloodline modification was not cheap, and a bloodline modification that could raise a sorcerer's rank was even more expensive. Hence, low-rank sorcerers who were short of money were more willing to sign contracts to obtain resources from their families in order to complete their bloodline modification. The surging undercurrents in his family also stirred Grimm's heart, and he began to frequently contact Merrill and Gargamel to discuss this issue. Merrill no longer had any worries. She could sit in the position of manager with peace of mind and not delay the growth of her own strength. Gargamel, on the other hand, could only helplessly stare at Grimm, sighing and vexed. Gargamel was already more than 200 years old, and his body and spells showed obvious signs of weakening. If he had not relied on Grimm and accumulated enough resources to hold a lowest rank life extension ritual for himself, allowing him to live for another 50 years, he would have died a long time ago. Even so, Gargamel's current strength was only at the advanced Grade 1 stage, and there was still a long way to go before he reached his peak. With his current strength, it was almost impossible for him to advance to Grade 2 before his life ran out. Hence, compared to Merrill, Gargamel's desire and urge to carry out bloodline modification was much stronger and more urgent. Frankly speaking, Grimm did not intend to promote the bloodline modification plan he had used on Merrill. After all, this bloodline modification required a powerful creature's bloodline source, as well as meticulously bred source stealing bugs. The combination of these two rare resources would result in an astonishing amount of resources. If it was not for the sake of collecting some necessary data for his bloodline modification, Grimm would not have been willing to spend so extravagantly. However, the reaction of his family had indirectly reminded him that using the AI chip's high efficiency and precision to carry out some cost-effective research on bloodlines was also feasible. After all, low-rank sorcerers only sought to increase their lifespan by 1 or 200 years. There was no need for Grimm to waste a rare resource like a Grade 3 dragon. He could just casually find a Grade 2 magic beast that was easy to breed and could breed in large numbers. As for whether these wizards could obtain powerful auxiliary abilities through this bloodline transformation, it was not within Grimm's scope of consideration. In short, he had to reduce the cost as much as he could. The cheaper and easier it was to breed, the better. However, for someone like Gargamel who had made outstanding contributions to the family, there was nothing wrong with raising the quality of his bloodline. With this in mind, Grimm divided the bloodline modifications into low, medium, and high grades. He had the AI chip conduct a wide range of bloodline sources and suggest a feasible modification plan. On the other hand, Grimm ordered Gargamel and Merrill to come up with a contribution system for the Magi of the Crimson family. This way, the Magi of the Crimson family could use their contribution points to exchange for bloodline modification services. In the past 100 years, the Crimson family had long since established a complete contribution point system. The Crimson family had invested many precious resources into this system, such as elemental magic puppets, metal magic equipment, mana essences, powerful magic essences, a weakened version of the Serum of Life, as well as many gold-refined items. The Magi of the Crimson family could receive magic crystals and contribution points as a reward by accepting missions from the family, which could be used to exchange for high-value resources at a lower price. Many wandering Magi were willing to join the Crimson family, thinking of ways to exchange for elemental magic puppets or metal magic equipment for a profit. After all, the Crimson family's elemental magic puppets and metal magic equipment were quite famous in the Scattered Towers. Now, with the appearance of the bloodline modification package, it immediately caused a tsunami of commotion within the Crimson family. The price of contribution points, which were of average value in the past, suddenly skyrocketed, and the Magi within the family were hyped up. This was because contribution points within the Crimson family could be traded. The moment the bloodline modification plan was released, many big shots of the family unhesitatingly pre-ordered the top-grade package. Among them, there was no lack of elders like Cabby, Tigula, and Gargamel. Amongst them, Gargamel and Cabby were facing a grim situation. Their lifespans were not long. It was fine if they had not tasted the taste of power. Lying in the mud and closing their eyes, their lives would be over. However, people like them, who were deeply immersed in power, only now did they realize the value of life. Hence, even if they had to sell everything they had, they would choose the best package for themselves. Chapter 920. Once the bloodline package was mentioned, it immediately caused a huge uproar within the Crimson family. The entire package could be split into 3 grades: low, medium, high, and top grade. The low-grade package could only fuse with the bloodlines of exotic beasts or magical creatures, allowing the modified magi to have special spells in certain areas. Only the mid-grade and above bloodline packages had the miraculous effect of increasing one's strength, allowing magi who had lost their path of advancement to have another chance at breaking through to the mid-grade. Their price was just like their value, so high that it made people feel despair. Even the lowest grade bloodline modification would cost 20,000 contribution points, and a mid-grade bloodline modification that most magi were interested in would cost 50,000 contribution points. However, in the Crimson family's mission list, a grade 1 magus who guarded a family encampment or resource point for a year would only earn 300 contribution points. Daily activities such as patrolling, hunting, potion concocting, and crafting magic tools were mostly less than 100 points. Hence, if magi from most families wanted to accumulate enough contribution points before their lifespans ended, the only way was through war. Like all magus families, the Crimson family's mission list had the most generous reward for planar wars and magus wars, easily earning 3,000 to 4,000 contribution points. This led to an uncontrollable wave of requests from the Crimson family for war. Grimm, Mary, Alice, and a few core magi gathered together for a simple discussion and quickly came up with a feasible battle plan. The magus world's large and small organizations were intertwined, and the relationships between them were complicated. If they rashly started a war here, it would be difficult to control the situation. On the other hand, the Goblin Plain was peaceful, so there was no need to stir up trouble there. Hence, after much deliberation, the only suitable place was the Lance Plain. After decades of development and cultivation by the Crimson family, they had basically established a foothold in the Lance Plain. As long as a few Grade 4 dragons did not attack together, the Eternal Capital would be an impregnable fortress that could withstand the invasion of a large group of dragons. All these years, in order to avoid a backlash from the Dragon Lords, the Crimson family had kept a low profile regarding the exploitation of resources in the Lance Plain. Even when they hunted giant dragons, they mainly poached and rarely raided the giant dragon's territory with great fanfare. This time, however, Grimm intended to go all out. He had actually targeted the Tier 4 Dragon Lord closest to Eternal Capital, the Amethyst Dragontorial. The nest of the Amethyst Dragontorial was located 23,000 kilometers northwest of the Eternal Capital in the Crystal Canyon. If Grimm's team wanted to reach there, they would have to pass through the territories of 23 Tier 1 dragons, 7 Tier 2 dragons, and 2 Tier 3 dragons. The journey could be said to be arduous and dangerous, and danger lurked in every corner. However, if the Crimson family wanted to get rid of these Tier 4 dragons, they would have to pay a certain price. 10 years ago, with the Crimson family's strength, they might not have dared to provoke those Tier 4 dragons. Now, however, the Tier 4 Metal Puppet Dragon had joined the Crimson family's forces and was equipped with multiple magic cannons. Its firepower had already reached the mid-tier of Tier 4 creatures. This was the main reason why Grimm dared to challenge the Tier 4 dragons. Grimm also wanted to use this opportunity to sort out the core forces of the family once more, selecting those with great potential and nurturing them carefully. Once the Lance Planar Expedition plan was announced, it immediately attracted the Crimson Magi's attention. Those who had been struggling to earn contribution points from the Planar Wars swept away their fear of the Planar Wars and rushed to the Eternal Capital to join the expedition. In a short period of time, close to 60% of the Crimson family's elite magi had gathered in the Eternal Capital, and the scale of the expedition grew larger and larger. Magus Calendar, Year 32889, 11th of June. On the 17th day after the declaration of war, the expedition gathered in the Eternal Capital finally set off. Amidst the clanking of metal and the clanking of chains, the huge metal gate on the west side of the Eternal Capital slowly moved to the sides, revealing a gigantic metal structure. From its appearance, it looked like a giant metal dragon that was 50 meters tall and 115 meters long. Its body was supported by two pairs of thick and sturdy metal legs, and its huge metal head was raised high, glinting with a faint blue magical metallic luster under the sunlight. Behind it was a steel tail that was nearly 10 meters long, densely covered in steel spikes and spikes. The tip of the tail was gathered into the shape of a meteor hammer. When such a steel dragon marched forward, the entire earth seemed to tremble and tremble slightly. Every time its four metal legs rose and fell, it would leave a huge pit that was 3 meters wide and 1 meter deep. Of course, this metal dragon was not the only metal dragon in the expedition. In front and behind the magical golem dragon, hundreds of goblin chariots were like soldiers escorting a general, whistling as they charged into the distance in perfect formation. In the sky above this huge fleet, a silver-white mothership floated quietly above the clouds, surrounded by 30 to 40 smaller goblin airships that were more agile. Further away, hundreds of strange-looking eyeball airships shuttled back and forth, occasionally lowering their altitude to drill into the bushes, dark forests, or misty swamps to investigate. Every time they discovered a dangerous area, the eyeball airships would summon the goblin airships and use goblin rockets or concentrated energy rays to clean up the area. This way, no matter what was hiding there, it would be instantly turned into a hornet's nest, no longer threatening the fleet. With this kind of three-dimensional investigation, the native creatures and spies of other races that were scattered along the route of the expeditionary army were in big trouble. Before they could even understand what was going on, they had already lost their lives. Of course, with such a huge formation of the expeditionary army, as long as the powerful native creatures were not stupid, they would run away at the sight of the wind, trying their best to escape from the route of the expeditionary army. Grimm and the other wizards on the mothership could clearly see that in front of the huge fleet of goblins, countless beasts and magical creatures were rushing out of their nests in panic, gathering into a black torrent and escaping towards the horizon. Among the huge fleet, the magic golem dragon was the slowest, but it could still reach 50 kilometers per hour. Thus, the vanguard fleet would stop at a certain place every once in a while to wait for the big guys at the back. Grimm and the other higher-ups of the Crimson family naturally chose to use the mothership as their ride. As the fleet slowly advanced, they silently made all sorts of preparations. For this expedition, the Crimson family had mobilized a total of 1 grade 4 magic golem dragon, 102 goblin chariots, 1 patrol mothership, 45 goblin airships, and 11 70 metal magic machines. This was only in terms of equipment. In terms of manpower, the Crimson family had given their all. Grade 3, Grimm, Mary, Lightning Dragon Arms, and Emerald Mother Dragon Aratina. Grade 2, Alice, Clone Brain Jellu, Insect Lich Bliss, Dragonman Zacha, Goblin Tigula, Dragon Eater Olivia, 2 Blood Knights, 3 Blood Elves, and 7 Green Dragons. The rest were 67 Tier 1 Sorcerers and 326 Sorcerer Apprentices. Apart from that, there were also 257 Goblin pilots and technicians. Such a huge fleet was naturally grandiose and earth-shattering. Everywhere they passed, beasts would flee. Unknowingly, a small beast tide had formed in front of the fleet. The wizards who were interested in the natural environment and magical creatures of other worlds boarded the goblin airships and spread out for dozens of miles around the fleet, searching for or collecting specimens from other worlds to increase their own species' reserves. During this period, it was inevitable that they would have to fight some native creatures or magical creatures. Every goblin airship was equipped with 5 to 10 metal magic machines and 3 magic cannons. The firepower they possessed was enough to flatten ordinary enemies. Once they encountered a powerful magical creature, the wizards in the fleet would quickly send out a message to the fleet behind them. Thus, more wizards and goblin airships would gather and use their ferocious firepower to drown the enemy. Although most of the native magical creatures were powerful, they could not fly. In that case, they were like moving targets in front of the goblin airships. Even if they ran until they were foaming at the mouth, they would not be able to escape the pursuit of the Magi. Thus, battered and unconscious magical creatures were transported onto the patrol motherships. Magical plants of different shapes and effects were also harvested and kept in the pockets of the Magi. The Magi who were good at concocting potions or concocting wizard beasts were kept busy in the cabins of the patrol motherships. Although the fleet already had a large number of magic machines as cannon fodder, adding a few more wizard beasts was not a bad idea. Just like that, they swaggered through the streets, plundering and looting. 2 days later, the huge fleet arrived at the territory of their first predetermined target. This was the territory of a Grade 1 little dragon. It had a circumference of about 100 miles, and there were 2 small cities of other races as well as a number of natives living together. Unfortunately, when the eyeball mech that was sent to investigate the little dragon's Steelback Mountain, the little dragon had already escaped without a trace. Even the simple and crude dragon nest had been emptied, and not even a small gold coin could be found. This situation undoubtedly made the cloned Brain Gru, who was planning the route of the fleet, extremely embarrassed. He could only silently curse the little dragons for being too cowardly. Actually, this little dragon was not to be blamed. The Magus Expeditionary Force had such a huge fleet and was so ostentatious. Even if the giant dragon lord's ears and eyes were closed, no matter how lazy they were, they would have heard the news long ago. Other than the dragon men, the giant dragon lords usually had many flying eyes and ears. As long as they went out to investigate, they would be able to find out the general strength of this huge fleet. Chapter 9:21. The Dragon Lord had escaped. However, it still left many eyes and ears in its territory, lying in ambush along the path of the Magi and launching frequent ambushes. These fellows were either Draconid warriors in groups of 3 or 5, or some aboriginals who did not know the meaning of death. Unfortunately, no matter what the situation was, they were unable to shake the huge metallic carriages that resembled a long snake. They came, they attacked, and they would stay forever. Little did they know that the ambush they thought to be covert was actually so clumsy and crude in the eyes of the Magi. The eyeball warships flying over 100 meters above the ground had a small hole the size of an egg under their bellies, shooting out probing waves of various colors. Regardless of whether the Draconids or Aboriginals were lying in ambush in mud traps, pits, or bushes, their massive life force could not escape the detection of the life ripples. The ambush they thought to be covert had actually been detected by the eyeball warships and was then transmitted to the Magi in the metallic carriages. Thus, a few of the goblin chariots that were charging at full speed suddenly turned, dragging clouds of dust behind them as they charged towards the traps. Before they could even get close to the traps, the magical cannons installed above the goblin chariots began to rumble continuously, blasting dust and leaves into the air around the traps. The Draconids and Aboriginals who were forced out of the traps did not even have the time to reach the chariots before they were blasted into pieces by concentrated energy rays and violent magical cannons, blood and flesh flying everywhere. If there were any Grade 2 creatures among the enemies lying in ambush, the few goblin chariots would not fight them head-on, turning the chariots to engage in guerrilla warfare. No matter how powerful a Grade 2 Draconid was, how many rounds of magical cannons could it withstand? If the enemies did not fall, there were Magi stationed in the accompanying chariots. Powerful spells with strange effects rained down on them, and even the most powerful of enemies would collapse in despair. From start to finish, the Draconids and Aboriginals could not even dream of catching up to the goblin chariots for a moment. As for the long-range skills they had, they were either heavy javelins or mid-range metal spears. Apart from adding a few dents and decorations to the metal body of the gnome chariots, they had no other use. On one side were fully armed killing machines from a higher plane, while on the other were narrow-minded and autistic primitive natives. Even if the Draconids' individual ability could easily crush the goblin drivers and the accompanying wizards, the battlefield was a one-sided slaughter. The ones who fell were the draconids who had strong basic qualities but primitive tactics, while the ones who stood proudly on the battlefield were the wretched goblins who were physically weak but armed themselves to the teeth with magical machinery and sorcery. This was not a special case of a local battlefield, but a powerful crushing of a foreign civilization against another backward civilization. In a powerful clash between civilizations, the difference in strength between the two sides would be obvious. It was not something that could be made up for with individual bravery and passion. At the very least, the scattered soldiers before them were not strong enough to ignore the difference in technology and equipment. Once the little dragon's territory was passed through, the huge metal convoy did not need to stop to rest and replenish supplies at all. After crushing the local sporadic ambushes with a domineering force, they proceeded along the pre-planned route of advance. The ignorant natives or magical creatures were initially dissatisfied with the metal caravan passing through their territory and prepared to give chase. However, when they saw the terrifying metal dragon that towered between the heavens and the earth behind the huge caravan with their own eyes, the little bit of violence and arrogance in their hearts instantly vanished. A foreign wizard had created a terrifying metal dragon and brought it to challenge the Dragon Lord. Such a rumor spread like a plague in all directions, causing every living creature who heard the news to be filled with anticipation. To be honest, in Lance, apart from the Draconid army and dragon worshippers, all native tribes with intelligence were filled with rage and hatred towards the Dragon Liege. When the Dragon Liege controlled the pinnacle of the plane's power, they could only choose to endure and submit. However, once the Dragon Liege was overthrown into the swamp by another powerful enemy, the hatred from thousands of years of enslavement would quickly explode. They didn't know if the wizards were holy spirits who had come to rescue them. However, when the Dragon Liege's domineering might and high-pressure rule collapsed, a sudden wave of retaliation swiftly engulfed the scattered draconids and dragon worshippers. In just 3 days, the metal caravan had crossed the little dragon's territory and entered the territory of another Grade 2 dragon. That Grade 2 dragon wasn't much stronger than the Grade 1 dragon, and the organized border guards collapsed under the metal caravan's ferocious cannon fire. Thus, the Grade 2 dragon hurriedly packed its bag and fled with the wealth it had painstakingly plundered. This was a long and narrow valley between two majestic mountains. Dragon worshippers from all over the Wilhar dragon territory were hard at work, stacking up sturdy stone ramparts and wooden platforms at the southern entrance of the valley. Burly Draconid warriors were scattered throughout the valley, resting while grinding their teeth as they polished their weapons. Around them, short ratmen or lizardmen hunched their bodies, carrying baskets full of food as they delivered it to them. Grabbing a pitch-black cheese from a wicker basket and tossing it into his mouth, the Draconid warrior Hannah spat it out after taking a bite and coughing violently. "Damn bastard! What is this?" Hannah roared in rage as he dug out a piece of cheese with traces of blood from his throat. Out of rage, Hannah hammered the ratman slave in front of him into a bloody pulp with his large, scaly hand. "Don't be picky. Eat this food for me." A Draconid leader who was dragging his huge body around the valley roared even louder. "Do you think this is still the Draconid camp? Do you think there's sweet and delicious sorrow pork chops waiting for you? Don't even think about it. Hurry up and eat this food. We still have to fight against those alien invaders in a while." In various parts of the valley, Draconid warriors raised the pitch-black jerky in their hands, but could not identify which species of rat or beast it came from no matter how hard they tried. All they could do was close their eyes and stuff it into their mouths. The pungent and bitter taste lingered in their mouths and nostrils, causing every Draconid warrior to frown and curse inwardly. It was too difficult to eat this unknown jerky that was comparable to dried tree bark. One Draconid warrior suddenly had an idea, grabbing a ratman slave beside him and twisting its head off, pouring the fresh blood into his mouth. As expected, the meat and cheese were no longer as hard to swallow as before, nourished by the fresh blood. The other Draconid warriors followed suit, grabbing the servants beside them and twisting or cracking their skulls as they gulped down the blood and brain juices. For a moment, the valley was filled with the Draconids' coarse and arrogant roars and bellows, mixed with the feeble, shrill cries of the rat men and lizard men before their deaths at the mouth of the valley in the distance. Native laborers captured from nearby villages were laboriously working, doing their best to reinforce the defensive fortress built from stacked boulders. Thick, sharpened wooden stakes were hammered into the soil, their tips pointed outwards and smeared with terrifying poison that could kill upon contact. Trolls, ogres, pigmen, bearmen. Many burly native slaves were either carrying the stakes on their shoulders or lifting them with their hands, busily working. Meanwhile, the black-robed dragon worshippers waved their leather whips and yelled incessantly, desperately urging them to move faster. Gazing into the distance from the mouth of the valley, one could see clouds of dust rising from the horizon, as if a behemoth was madly advancing towards them. Moss flicked the hood in front of his eyes with the tip of his whip, then raised his head and narrowed his eyes, silently looking at the sky. In the gloomy sky, sesame-sized black dots were hovering and hovering in the air. Judging from their flying heights and flying trajectories, they couldn't be mountain eagles. Most of the time, they were circling too urgently. Moses had never seen a flying creature with such an erratic flight path in his entire life. What were those? Flying magical creatures driven by wizards? Or was it an alchemy creation created by wizards using strange witchcraft? A series of questions popped up in his mind, but he couldn't find any answers. As an important figure in the dragon worshipper religion, Moss surely had his own tricks. Following a series of short and hurried incantations, Moss cast a Hawkeye spell on himself, and only then did he see the true faces of those black spots. Go, inform Lord Jamu that the enemy's sentinels are here. Moss grabbed a dragon worshipper's hand and gave the order with the harshest tone. Immediately, this dragon worshipper staggered into the deep part of the valley. After a short while, along with a slight vibration of the ground, a large group of dragon people warriors rushed out of the valley in orderly lines, with their long-handled axes raised high. The leader of this army was Jamu, the Tier 2 leader of the dragon people army. Enemy? Where are the enemies? Jamu gripped a pair of gigantic machetes in his hands, walked up to Moss, who was wearing a black cloak, and roared out with a thunderous step. Moss then pointed his long whip at the sky. Jamu covered his eyes with his hands, and his weird, lizard-like vertical pupils suddenly shrunk. With his super-strong eyesight, he instantly captured those strange black dots that were hovering in the dim sky. Illuminated by the dim light, the surfaces of those black dots were smooth and clean, reflecting the dim blue luster of magic metals. At first glance, Moss could tell that those black dots were not in the shape of magical creatures in the world of Lance. Get into the battle fort and hide. Those are the enemy's flying scouts. Chapter 922. The strange movements in the canyon could not be hidden from the Magi's eyes and ears. Relying on the life detection spell formation installed in the eyeball battleship, as well as the infrared scanning of the goblin magic machinery, the topography of the Dead Moon Canyon, as well as the densely packed red dots, had already appeared in the command hall of the patrol mothership from 20 miles away. At the center of the command hall, a book-like magic tool was embedded in the floor. As the eyeball battleships scanned the area from afar, the panoramic map of the terrain presented by this special magic tool became clearer and more detailed. 83 dragonoids, 465 native creatures. Among them, 2 are rank 2 creatures, 103 are rank 1 creatures, and the rest are not worth mentioning. However, the other party seems to have arranged some people on the cliff, as well as a large number of rolling stones and logs. They probably want to launch a sneak attack when we pass by. Wizard Merrill, who was wearing a bright red robe, sat in the middle and spoke frankly with assurance. All the rank 2 members of the Crimson family were gathered around her, silently watching the battle from the sidelines. Even the clone brain grew, swayed his huge metal body, and hid at the side, not saying a word. It was just a small obstacle, and there was no need for strong people like them to make a move. The reason they were here was more to get some military merits and rewards. As everyone watched coldly from the sidelines, Meryl quickly passed down a series of orders to the fleet below her. Immediately, 20 goblin chariots left the fleet and sped up towards the Dead Moon Canyon. In the sky, the 10 gnome airships followed closely and protected the small team from above. The 20 goblin chariots suddenly stopped when they were 2 miles away from the canyon's entrance. Then, they spread out in an arc and began to switch to siege mode. On the other hand, the 10 goblin airships that were following closely behind had almost 100 archer-type magical machines jump down, using their metal bodies to form a metal defensive line in front of the goblin chariots. The dragonoids and dragon worshippers hiding in the canyon had obviously never experienced the power of the goblin magic machinery. Just as they were feeling bewildered by the enemy's sudden halt, the magic cannons within the goblin defensive line began to fire fiercely. Dong, dong, dong. The pitch-black cannons that extended from the roof of the chariots suddenly burst forth with a dazzling red light. Plasma fireballs wrapped in violent magical energy shot towards the canyon, dragging long trails of black smoke behind them. What is this? Ordinary dragon men and dragon worshippers were still watching from afar, not knowing what was going on, but Jamu and Moss faces had already turned pale, and their hearts were pounding. "I'd quickly find something to hide." The loud voice of the Jamu leader immediately resounded across the valley. Unfortunately, its roar was quickly drowned out by a series of earth-shattering noises. No matter where the plasma fireball landed, as long as it hit something solid, it would explode with a bang. First, there was a burst of blue plasma lightning that scattered everywhere, followed by surging and violent flame shockwaves. A single plasma fireball was enough to cover an area of 10 to 20 meters. 20 plasma fireballs fell from the sky and instantly plowed through the entire canyon entrance. What he used was a plasma solution and a sea of fire. What they consumed was the lives of the draconids and dragon worshippers lying in ambush in the canyon. The power of flame shockwave might be on the low side, dealing only around 120 degrees of magic damage, but it had a wide area of effect, making it a powerful AoE weapon. On the other hand, the exploding plasma solution had a smaller area of effect, yet it could cause as much as 180 degrees of lightning damage. Facing this kind of magic attack, the thick-skinned dragon men with excellent magic resistance were able to handle it a little better, but those dragon worshippers, whose magic resistance was only average, instantly became the target of the devastating magic attack. Those dragon worshippers, who were swept across by the flame shockwave, were bathed in flames, turning into human-shaped torches, screaming and bumping around in the canyon. They were either darting left and right, desperately asking for help from the people around them, or rolling on the ground, trying to put out the flame. Unfortunately, what they encountered was a magic flame, which could not be extinguished by sand or water sacks. After the first flame shockwave, 20 to 30 burning men were seen running and howling in the canyon. The second flame shockwave swept across, and those burning men fell to the ground, turning into fiercely burning bonfires. The third flame shockwave swept across, and those burning men lost all signs of life. Charred and broken corpses were exposed in the flame. As for those dragon worshippers who were poured on their bodies by the plasma solution, they were directly vaporized and melted. After a round of attack, 23 dragon worshippers were killed and 11 were seriously injured. Meanwhile, 2 dragon men died, and many others were wounded. The 2 dragon men who died were more unlucky. They were hit by 2 or 3 plasma fireballs and were burned into ashes before they could even scream. However, while the canyon was in a mess, the goblin chariot in the distance shook violently again, and another 20 plasma fireballs rose into the sky, falling into the canyon. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Jamu, the Tier 2 Dragon Man leader, kept cursing. He had never seen enemies with such powerful long-range attacks. In a lance plane, although there were magical creatures with powerful long-range attacks, They could hardly form into a large scale, let alone become enemies with the Dragon Lords. Yet, this group of inconspicuous fellows were able to unleash such powerful magic power while hiding in a metal house. This was way beyond the Dragon Man leader's expectations. To fight against such enemies, one must find a way to get close to them and fight them in close combat. However, it was too late for the Dragon Man leader to regret, because the second wave of attack had arrived. Inside the canyon, the road between two steep mountains was only 30 meters wide and 3 miles long from south to north. In such a narrow space, it was impossible to dodge the plasma fireballs falling from the sky. Therefore, Jamu raised a pair of giant blades in his hands and gave the order to his dragon men to charge at once. He took the lead, trampling a few half-dead charred human figures into pieces, breaking the stone barricades that were as high as his chest, crazily pouncing on the goblin chariot formation 2 miles away. Behind it, the Draconid warriors that were covered in smoke and fire staggered as they charged forward. However, once they showed their heads, the 10 goblin airships that had already arrived at the entrance of the canyon swooshed down countless goblin missiles, instantly drowning them in the exploding fire. The explosive shock wave of the alchemy cannon was accompanied by shrapnel, creating a terrifying killing effect on the battlefield. All the Dragonoid warriors who charged out of the canyon were wounded without exception, their purple-black dragon scales full of blood stains and bloody holes. With every step forward, the wounds on their bodies would spurt out blood. Jamu was indeed a level 2 Dragon Man leader. 3 purple-black elemental shields emerged around his body, blocking most of the attacks. Only the parts of his lower body that couldn't be blocked by the shields, some wounds could be seen. However, when Jamu was about to rush to the goblin chariot, his body was suddenly shrouded in gray, and his running speed was abruptly reduced by half. Meanwhile, the grassy plain in front of him suddenly turned into a quicksand swamp, making his sturdy dragon legs sink down once he stepped into it. A level 1 aging curse, a level 1 quicksand trap. Although they were only level 1 spells, when used on the body of Jamu, the level 2 Dragon Man leader, they were no less powerful than level 2 spells. When Jamu and the few dragon men were stuck in the quicksand and couldn't move forward, the black muzzles on the goblin chariot moved, aiming at these eye-catching targets. Meanwhile, the archer-type magic machines guarding in front of the goblin chariot also raised the magic ray guns in their hands, crazily shooting magic rays at the enemies in their field of vision at the highest frequency. Scorching rays with amazing penetrative power, freezing rays that could slow down the enemy's movements, petrifying rays that could turn part of the enemy's bodies into earth elements, blinding rays that could blind the enemies. Different colored magic rays with strange effects fell on the dragonmen's bodies like raindrops, making them let out muffled moans and put their bodies in all kinds of weird magic states. However, when they were stopped by the attacks of the archer-type magic machines, a series of violent plasma fireballs fell right on their heads, immediately causing immeasurable damage to the dragon men. Wherever the plasma was splashed on, the bodies of the dragon men would turn into puffs of smoke, like snow under the scorching sun. Their bodies would be badly damaged. Wherever the violent shock waves of flames surged, the broken scales of the Dragonoid warriors could no longer protect them. Their flesh sizzled as they were burned, and they wailed in agony. Goblin fire arrows and alchemy bombs fell from the sky like raindrops. Quicksand traps blocked the way from the ground. Archer-type magic machines crazily shot at them, and goblin chariot cannons wildly bombarded the dragon men from afar. Groups of dragon men were blocked once they rushed out of the valley. They could only raise their battle axes high to cover their heads, clench their teeth, and move forward with all their might. Finally, a few lucky dragon men broke through the hell of flesh and blood and started fighting against those archer-type magic machines at a close distance. Under their ferocious and fearless charge, the archer magic machines were chopped into pieces one after another. Sparks flew all over the place as they were torn apart. Unfortunately, the number of archer-type magic machines was far greater than those dragon men who were risking their lives to attack. Therefore, under the concentrated energy rays at a close distance, the few dragon men who were already badly wounded were soon turned into sieves, heroically and tragically falling less than 300 meters away from the goblin chariot. Meanwhile, the dragon man leader, named Jamu, also fell helplessly to the ground under the bombardment of the plasma fireballs. His body was scorched black and badly damaged, almost unrecognizable. While the dragon men at the front line were defeated miserably, hundreds of eyeball fighters swooped down from the sky and quickly flew across the cliffs on both sides. Scorching rays fell like raindrops. On the cliffs, and in some dark places on the cliffs, local warriors cried and fled in all directions, only to be killed one after another by the concentrated rays. Chapter 923. This was a blatant massacre. With a number of dragon spawn hiding in the Valley of the Dead Moon and the perfect terrain, it should have been enough to defend against an army of thousands of ordinary creatures. Unfortunately, they did not encounter ordinary creatures, but a magus army that had come from another plane. The strength of both sides was not on the same level. Hence, the entire battle was like a game, an interesting hunt. The powerful dragon spawn army that was originally the ruler of Lance was completely annihilated under the bombardment of the goblin cannons. Despite paying such a heavy price, they had only managed to destroy 7 Sagittarius magical equipment. After the battle was over, the dragon spawn, dead or alive, were transported to the cruiser and became basic materials for the Magi to create flesh puppets or powerful wizard beasts. The 7 damaged magic machines were also sent back to the goblin factory to be disassembled and reassembled. A quarter of an hour later, 7 brand new Archer magic machines were successfully produced. Not only did the ambush that the Grade 2 giant dragon sent out not cause any losses to the Magus Expeditionary Army, they even received a large number of high-quality and valuable corpses. As for the energy consumption caused by the goblin cannon's bombardment, it was replenished after they returned to the convoy. Whether it was the mothership in the sky or the huge magical golem dragon at the back of the convoy, the powerful magical furnace array not only met their own needs, but also had a large amount of energy left to recharge the magical mechanical legion. Hence, such a small-scale, low-intensity battle would not cause any losses to the Magus Expeditionary Army. Obviously, the natives of Lance did not know about this and could not understand it. From their point of view, as long as they cut off the enemy's retreat and the constant harassment of the natives, it was obvious that the enemy would collapse without a fight. Unfortunately, with their intellect, it was difficult for them to understand the Magus army that far surpassed them in terms of knowledge and ability. Although the enemies in the Valley of the Dead Moon had been eliminated, the narrow passageway in the valley could not accommodate the golem dragon's huge metal body. Hence, the metallic convoy slowly stopped near the entrance of the valley, silently waiting for orders from above. Meanwhile, inside the golem dragon's huge metal shell that was 40 meters above the ground, the old goblin Ganga was jumping up and down while roaring. "Advance! Advance! Let those who look down on us witness the true power of this big treasure. Prepare the destructive rays, widen this canyon." As the old goblin howled, the huge puppet dragon didn't stop. Its 4 sturdy legs left deep footprints behind as it continued to stride towards the canyon. The goblins that were gathered at the entrance of the canyon hurriedly moved to the sides of the road to avoid being trampled by the golem dragon's terrifying metal limbs. While advancing, the puppet dragon's dragon head twisted and turned agilely. The depths of its 2 huge 1-meter-wide eye sockets suddenly lit up with a scorching red light. Immediately after, 2 terrifying red lights that were half a meter thick shot out, cutting through the cliffs on both sides of the canyon from near to far. There didn't seem to be any movement a moment ago, but after 3 flicks of a finger, there was a series of explosions. The cliffs on both sides of the canyon suddenly gave off a huge cloud of dust and then collapsed under the dumbfounded gazes of the crowd. 10 meters on each side. The cliffs on both sides of the canyon were cut down by the 2 terrifying red lights and then collapsed under the pressure and expansion of the terrifyingly high temperature. The canyon passageway was originally 30 to 40 meters wide, and now it was widened by 20 meters, allowing the golem dragon to pass through it with some difficulty. Hence, the golem dragon didn't stop for even a moment. It stepped on the rubble as it moved forward and actually managed to squeeze its way through the canyon that was 3 miles long. The many magi of the Crimson family on the patrol mothership couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. They were once again shocked by this super grade 4 magic machine. Grade 4? Is this the strength of a grade 4 magic machine? Sure enough, it was just as he had expected. It could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth, shocking everyone. Although the battle just now was intense, it was only a low-intensity battle. If it was this grade 4 golem dragon, it wouldn't even need to exert too much effort. All it had to do was sweep its red eyes across the canyon, and the enemies would vanish in an instant. No matter how strong a grade 2 dragonoid was, could it withstand a grade 4 golem dragon stomp? The destructive ray just now sounded domineering, but in reality, it was just a scorching ray. However, compared to a normal scorching ray, the golem dragon's super magic furnace was much sharper and more effective. Depending on the amount of magical energy that was poured into the same spell, the characteristics of the spell would also change drastically. The scorching ray that was around 100 degrees Celsius was called a scorching ray, while the scorching ray that was above 200 degrees Celsius was called a scorching ray. As for the golem dragon, the scorching ray that had an energy level of 800 to 900 degrees Celsius was already beginning to possess the characteristics of destruction and had a hint of annihilation energy. Most magical shields in the world would not be able to withstand such a high-intensity scorching ray, not to mention that the attack was so concentrated and swift. Even if it was Grim, if he had been hit by those 2 destructive rays, he would have collapsed like a cliff. No matter how many magical shields he had, it would be useless against such a powerful attack. Therefore, it was like watching a soul-stirring magic show from the sidelines. A metal dragon that could support the heavens and the earth roared as it moved forward in the towering canyon, forcibly opening up a wide and flat road between the 2 mountains. But right now, the main road was overturned by the collapsed cliff. As the metal dragon violently and savagely barged through, the road was filled with falling rock fragments, making it even more difficult to pass through. This was awkward. The golem dragon forced its way through with brute force, but the path it passed through was covered by tens of thousands of cliff fragments. The goblin chariots that were lagging behind did not have the ability to cross the gravel canyon like the golem dragon. Hence, under the command of the mothership, the goblin airships floated down and used alloy steel wires to hoist the goblin chariots. It took them half a day to transport them over. With this as an example, the Dragon Lords learned from their mistakes. They would no longer form an army and fight the wizards head-on. Instead, they had other ideas. If they couldn't do it in the open, they would do it in the dark. The dragon worshippers took off their black robes and blended into the group of ordinary native creatures, launching sneak attacks while the goblin caravan was resting. Some of them acted as death squads and charged at the caravan. Some hid near the water source and poisoned it, and some dug up the path of the caravan in advance to slow it down. Some of these operations were successful, killing some goblins, but most of them failed. After all, under the detection and scanning of the hundreds of eyeballs in the sky, any life forms that wanted to approach the caravan would have to pay with their lives. Of course, not all giant dragon lords were so wise. The 4th giant dragon territory that the Magi group passed through was the territory of a rank 1 little dragon. This hot-blooded little dragon was obviously unwilling to submit to the Magi's tyranny. Hence, it took the risk and tried to ambush the wizards with its extreme speed and powerful dragon breath. Therefore, it came and stayed, and successfully became the first valuable spoil of war for the Magus Expeditionary Force. The Grade 1 little dragon was beaten black and blue. Then, it was fixed to the deck of the patrol mothership by the Magi, which weighed tens of tons. It howled in pain day and night, but could not receive any help. Finally, the arrogance of the Wizard Expeditionary Force attracted the first powerful enemy. Under the guidance of the cloned Brain Jellu, the Wizard Expeditionary Force avoided most of the swamps, hills, and deserts, passing through grasslands or wastelands. On this day, when the metal caravan came to a grassland lake to set up camp and rest, a series of loud and clear dragon roars sounded from the horizon. The goblins who went to the lake to fetch water and wash up quickly put on their clothes and hurriedly went back into the goblin war chariot. The magical golem dragon also slowly adjusted its posture, raising its head high and aiming at the black that in the sky that was getting bigger and bigger. A moment later, a strong gale swept through the entire camp, and a silver-white, proud and elegant silver dragon hovered in the air above the magical golem dragon. It could be seen that it was extremely fearful of the magical puppet dragon. It stopped moving when it was a kilometer away from the magical puppet dragon. The silver dragon flapped its soft wings, floating in the air with a proud and elegant posture. It silently looked down at the huge metal dragon. After looking for a long time, the silver dragon raised its head and glanced at the mothership high up in the clouds. Only then did it break the stalemate with a thunderous dragon roar. Outsiders, what are you trying to do? Why are you invading the plane of the dragons? Are you torturing our kind? Grim, who was in the mothership, smiled faintly. This was a grade 3 male silver dragon. The strength of the Wizard Expeditionary Force had exceeded the limits of the Dragon Lords, which was why they came out to question their intentions. If it was some weak fellow, the dragons would not be so interested. They could just kill them with dragon breath. Who would have the interest to come to a remote place like this to stop them and question them? Chapter 924. The silver dragon's amber eyes narrowed as it stared at the newcomer. Who are you? How should I address you? After the flames dissipated, Grim landed on top of the puppet dragon's huge head. There were 2 metal horns protruding from the middle of the dragon's head, and in front of the horns was a small platform of about 20 square meters. Grim stood firmly on the platform, looking at the newcomer with a smile. A grade 3 human magus, the silver dragon didn't need any detection spells to determine the newcomer's strength and basic attributes just by looking at the level of the flames. Furthermore, the silver dragon could even smell the scent of the dragon's soul curse on him. This meant that many dragons had died at the hands of this human magus. Otherwise, the dragon's soul curse on him would not be so dense. Barely suppressing the anger surging in his heart, the silver dragon narrowed his eyes and replied loudly, I am Arders of the Silver Dragon clan. You are trampling on my territory and slaughtering my people. So, I have the right and authority to ask you, what are you trying to do? So it's Lord Alders. Grim's smile widened. My name is Grim, and I come from the Magus world. I'm here for... At this point, Grim's voice suddenly became softer, and the rest of his sentence became as soft as a mosquito's. The silver dragon was stunned, and before it could ask anything, its expression changed. Bastard, you damned magi. Unbeknownst to him, a dark red blood shadow had actually lurked in the shadows beneath him. At this moment, it was crashing through the ground and charging towards Alfred at lightning speed. Although it was caught off guard by the sudden attack, how could a grade 3 silver dragon not be on guard? A silver light flashed in the sky, and the silver dragon's huge body disappeared, reappearing 100 meters away. However, as soon as Alfred teleported over, it felt the elements above its head churning. A huge fireball smashed into its back, exploding into a huge ball of fire. Extremely high-temperature flames gushed out from the broken fireball and almost instantly roasted the dragon's scales near the point of impact, turning them red and white. Even the flesh under the protection of the dragon's scales sizzled from the scorching heat. Alfred no longer cared about his face and dignity. He flapped his silver-scaled wings rapidly and drew a beautiful arc in the air like a silver line, dodging the golem dragon's beam of milky white light that was spurted out by the golem dragon. Silver Dragon Alfred dodged Mary and Grim's pincer attack with his incredible flying speed and unparalleled flying skills. Only then did he manage to escape. You bastards! You don't have a shred of dignity and glory as a magus. You could just wait to die here. The silver dragon spat out these harsh words as it frantically fled, its resonant dragon roar clearly audible even from tens of kilometers away. A ball of fire exploded in the air, and Grimm's huge body slowly appeared. Mary also flapped her wings and came to his side. Silver dragons are known for their speed. They're as hard to deal with as the wind dragon. Looks like we won't be able to stop this guy with just the two of us. Grimm shook his head and sighed as he observed the silver dragon's back. Mary also raised her arm. Looking at her right hand that had turned into a bloody claw, she smiled and said, "You gave it a fireball, and I gave it a claw. I'm afraid it's already very uncomfortable. Are you really going to stop it?" This was actually normal. With the strength of the dragon race's body and elemental energy, they were outstanding among most creatures of the same rank. Under normal circumstances, a grade 3 dragon could easily deal with 2 or 3 human sorcerers without a problem. Today, the main reason why Silver Dragon Alfred had suffered a great loss under the pincer attack of Grimm and Mary was because of the grade 4 puppet dragon under Grimm. The grade 4 puppet dragon might not be able to fly, and its running speed was not fast, but its attacks were too sharp. Even grade 4 elemental wizards could not compare to the puppet dragon in terms of attack power. It could not be helped. No matter how strong a human's body was, no matter how talented they were in elemental energy, they could not compare to the extraordinarily powerful super magic furnace in the puppet dragon's abdomen. No matter how thick the blood vessels in humans' body were, they could not compare to the puppet dragon's energy pipes that were wide enough to run a carriage. Therefore, when the grade 3 silver dragon was fighting against Grimm and Mary, it still had to pay half of its attention to the puppet dragon. That was why it had suffered a great loss under the pincer attack of the two, and could only run away after saying something ruthless. With the silver dragon's speed, Mary might be able to catch up, but it would be difficult for her to catch up. With the silver dragon's speed, Mary might be able to catch up, but it would be difficult for her to catch up. Hence, the two of them could only watch as the silver dragon Alfred fled into the distance. However, the two of them weren't too concerned about this. They were about to reach the silver dragon's lair anyway. When the time came, they would directly attack its lair and see if it would defend or not. The silver dragon Alfred's lair was at a place called the Peak of the Storm. It was a lonely mountain peak that pierced through the clouds. The surrounding terrain was not particularly dangerous, but it was strange that the ground here was uprooted. The mountain peak was thousands of meters tall, rugged and precipitous, and there was almost no way to climb it. The silver dragon Alfred's lair was built on the peak of the mountain, almost completely isolated from the rest of the world. In such an area, the puppet dragon and the goblin war chariots could not climb up, but they could not stop the patrol mothership. Leaving the metal caravan at the foot of the mountain, Grimm and the group of scarlet magi boarded the patrol mothership and ascended to the peak. The air was thin at the top of the high cliff, and the wind was biting cold. Rolling clouds could be seen everywhere, and it would be difficult for normal people to survive here. Grimm frowned slightly when he reached the top of the cliff. It was too quiet here, and it was obvious that the silver dragon had escaped. Grimm turned his head to look at Bliss, who was behind him, as he saw a huge cave not far away. Insect Shaman Bliss understood and took a step forward. Suddenly, thousands of black beetles surged out of the black robe beneath him and rushed into the cave like a black tide. A moment later, the dark cave shook and trembled, and the faint sounds of elemental explosions could be heard. Bliss snorted and said in a low voice, "There's nothing left in the cave, but there are many elemental traps and magic gears left behind. Looks like that fellow wants us to suffer a small loss here." The swarm of insects that Bliss had sent out had lost about 20% of its members, and this caused his expression to turn gloomy. He wants us to retreat just because he left some traps? Inform Gon gotta dig up this mountain for me. Moments later, Grimm and the rest boarded the patrol mothership. Just as they left the mountain, they saw the towering mountain peak tremble and then slowly collapse with a deafening roar. News of the storm summit being forcefully pushed down by the Magi quickly spread. Those who did not understand the strength of the Magus Expeditionary Force were thoroughly shocked. Even a rank 3 Dragon Lord had to flee at the mere sight of them, unable to protect its own nest. One could only imagine the strength of this group of enemies. Hence, for the rest of the journey, no one dared to cause trouble in the caravan. Furthermore, the dragons were no fools. Based on the route of the Magus Expeditionary Force, they quickly deduced that their target was the territory of the rank 4 Dragon Lord, Toriel. This was what shocked and puzzled them. On what basis? A group of human magi who were only rank 2 or 3 dared to challenge a rank 4 Dragon Lord. This was simply too inconceivable. Could it be that the other party was relying on that strange metal dragon? Thinking that they had found the crux of the problem, the dragons who had been chased away from their homes roared and gathered together, using all sorts of methods to investigate the strength of the metal dragon. None of them would risk their lives to personally investigate. However, they were willing to send a few Dragonkin guards and high-ranked dragon worshippers. Hence, under the summons of the Dragon Lords and the high bounties, half of Lance was in an uproar. Powerful Dragonkin warriors and native creatures with strange methods swarmed towards the Magus Expeditionary Force, frequently attacking the Metal Dragon caravan. But it had to be said that these strange people who had gathered a small part of the Lance Plain really did have all sorts of strange abilities. Some of them were adept at hiding their life auras, lying in ambush beside the goblin caravan's campsite. When the goblins came to fetch water, they suddenly launched a surprise attack, causing many casualties to the goblin caravan. However, the high density of magic equipment patrolling the caravan also caused these ambushers to suffer heavy losses. On average, killing a goblin would cost the lives of more than a dozen native elites. Some who were adept at using poison tried to poison the water the goblins drank. Unfortunately, the goblin caravan had a very complete inspection system and quickly discovered their scheme. With the potion's masters in the caravan, none of the goblins would be poisoned to death. After all, compared to the potion's masters of the Magus world, the poisoners of Lance were more like a group of witch doctors. The knowledge and methods of both sides were not on the same level. After a series of secret battles, the potion's masters of the Magus army successfully repelled the native poison attacks. Chapter 925. The strength of the dragon race was not to be underestimated, especially when the arrogant giant dragons learned to fight guerrilla warfare. The casualties of the Sorcerer Expeditionary Army began to rise. Knowing that ordinary draconians and natives couldn't threaten the fully armed Magic Machine Legion, the Tier 1 little dragons set aside their pride and dignity and treated themselves as a guerrilla. They began to harass the Magic Machine Legion's lookouts around the perimeter. They came and went in groups of 3 to 5, never attempting to get close to the Magic Machine Corps. Instead, they focused on the eyeball aircrafts on the periphery. They used the Aborigines to lure the eyeball aircrafts out. Then, they gathered together and used their sharp claws and scorching dragon breath to take down the eyeball aircrafts one by one. Once the Magic Machine Corps sent a convoy to chase them away, they would not continue to fight and would scatter. Relying on their high-flying speed, they would not fight with the Goblin convoy at all. If any Goblin commander was too arrogant and dared to chase them with a Goblin airship, as soon as they left the range of the Magic Machine Corps support, these scatter dragons would even split up and attack their enemies together, using the strength of the dragon race to teach their enemies a lesson. Even with a sorcerer in charge, a normal goblin airship would not be able to withstand the trampling of 2 to 3 Tier 1 dragons. Moreover, there were often Tier 2 giant dragons hidden among these Tier 1 dragons. After losing 2 goblin airships and 3 family sorcerers, the higher-ups of the Crimson family, who were in charge of the patrol airships, were forced to order the sorcerers to not chase after the fleeing giant dragons. After tasting some benefits, seeing that the sorcerers were no longer fooled, the giant dragons became bolder. Some of the Tier 2 dragons also gathered together and attacked the Magic Machinery Division in droves. They did not barge into the Magic Machine Corps' convoy. Instead, they flew around the periphery of the convoy, As long as the convoy dared to move and open up a gap, the giant dragons dared to come and plowed through the convoy with their scorching dragon breath. Every few days, the giant dragons would play a chase with the goblin airships in the sky. Although the specific effect of the attack was not obvious, it effectively slowed down the magic machine corps' progress. Most of the goblin chariots could only circle around the magical golem dragon and advance at a relatively slow speed. If it were not for the fact that the Sorcerer Expeditionary Army had a high degree of magic mechanization and did not need external energy supplies, they might have been directly dragged down by the harassment of the dragons. The Crimson family's expedition this time was a game of dragon hunting. Although the Crimson family's target was the Tier 4 dragon, every Crimson sorcerer knew that it was impossible to kill the dragon. At least, the Crimson family did not have such power at the moment. Therefore, the purpose of alerting the enemy was to gather these giant dragons together so that it would be easier to capture all of them in one fell swoop. Therefore, the Sorcerer Expeditionary Force was not in a hurry to advance. Instead, they maintained a slow movement speed, teasing the dragons bit by bit. As more and more dragon lords were attracted, the number of dragons gathered at the periphery of the Magic Mechanical Legion was as high as 100. The group had the guts. When there were only a few dragons, they might not have dared to barge into the Magic Machine Legion. But when hundreds of dragons gathered, their confidence inevitably swelled again. The metal dragon indeed had the power of a Tier 4 dragon, but it moved slowly and could not fly. As long as they did not get too close to it, the thick-skinned dragon that could fly and fight well would not fear a group of human sorcerers who only dared to hide and steal. Therefore, in a plain area called the Northern Wilderness, a large group of dragons swarmed over and blocked the path of the Magic Mechanical Legion. An earth-shattering war was about to break out. The Sorcerer Expeditionary Force passed through the territories of the Dragon Lords without a care in the world, destroying 7 dragon lairs in a row. Such an outrageous act naturally drew the ire of the Dragon Lords. Even the Dragon Lords within a radius of 5,000 kilometers rushed out of their nests after hearing the news, traveling day and night to get here, let alone the unlucky giant dragons who had suffered the most. Moreover, they wouldn't come alone. Every Dragon Lord would more or less bring along a group of their own draconians. Therefore, after gathering them together, they managed to form an army of more than 6,000 Dragonoid soldiers. Of course, apart from the Dragonoid army that acted as the main force, there were also 30,000 dragon worshippers and up to 260,000 native servants. With such a large army, the Dragon Lords became even more confident. The dragons that wandered around the periphery of the Magic Mechanical Legion became more active and aggressive. At this point, the Magic Mechanical Legion did not advance any further. Instead, they chose a relatively open area to set up a line of defense. With the magical golem dragon at the center, goblin chariots and goblin airships formed an indestructible steel wall. On the other hand, the mothership hovered above the magical golem dragon, not only shielding it from attacks from above, but also acting as the commander of the battle. To be honest, before the war started, the sorcerers were clearly the attackers, while the Dragon Lords were the passive defenders. However, once there was a clear change in the strength of both sides, the situation on the battlefield instantly flipped. Unknowingly, the Dragon Lords became the attackers, while the sorcerers who came from afar became the defenders. Both sides fought back and forth in the Northern Wilderness, starting a battle of life and death. After a few rounds of probing and seesawing, the dragons could no longer hold back their flames of vengeance and finally launched an all-out attack. On this morning, after a hurried breakfast, the Dragonoids, dragon worshippers, and native tribes rushed out from their hiding places and began to gather on the outskirts of the Northern Wilderness on a large scale. Hundreds of giant dragons also rushed into the sky and circled around there, roaring nonstop. Under the urging and coercion of the hundreds of Dragon Lords, the native tribes gathered together and formed a black wave of people. From all directions, they madly pounced towards the rows of towering steel lines of defense in the depths of the wilderness. Jungle trolls, boarmen, ogres, ratmen, wild goblins, swamp demons, mountain giants, hill dwarfs, gnolls, kobolds, rhinoceroses, giant beam-men. All kinds of strange races that were barely seen in the outside world roared and roared as they charged at the well-prepared magical machine legion. Some rode on forest wolves as if they were flying, some flapped their meaty wings and flew close to the ground, some swayed their sturdy bodies and roared as they advanced, some formed groups and ran. In an instant, the entire northern wilderness became a stage for the native tribes to showcase. It was an eye-opening and refreshing sight. Unfortunately, this was a war. Moreover, it was the cruelest and bloodiest planar war. The magic cannons that had long been set up in the siege mode began their performance when they were about a kilometer away from the magical Golem Legion. 97 goblin chariots gathered around the magical Golem dragons, forming a 2-kilometer metal defensive line. When the enemies stepped into the attack range of the goblin chariots, the magic cannons erected on top of the chariots quickly charged. Then, with a violent tremble, black and red energy fireballs rose into the sky, drawing beautiful arcs in the air, dragging long tails of black smoke behind them as they smashed towards the black wave of charging valiantly. In the sky, the goblin airships that were hovering in the air suddenly burst into flames. Goblin fire arrows with orange tails were mixed in the center of the energy fireballs, whistling as they pounced towards the crowd. The battle began with a pincer attack from the energy fireballs and goblin fire arrows. To be honest, the natives of the Lance Plain had never seen such a spectacular and beautiful scene before. Many who were charging forward couldn't help but slow down, holding their breaths as they stared at the magnificent scene. They watched as the beautiful fireballs and the whistling iron lumps approached them from afar and finally landed among them. In the next second, the entire world seemed to have collapsed. Undulating, continuous booms filled their ears, and the sight of the exploding red light and the dismembered bodies of their companions filled their eyes. Even if the natives at the center of the explosions didn't die from the extreme heat and violent shockwaves of the explosions, they would still be devoured by the waves of flames. Most of their bodies were vaporized by the overlapping and colliding waves of elemental energy. Occasionally, there were some broken limbs that escaped the fiercest part of the elemental explosion, but they would still be burnt into charcoal by the waves of flames as they danced in the air. Only the lucky ones who were at the edge of the explosion had a chance of keeping their bodies intact. However, as the magical flames ignited everything that could be burned, the entire front line turned into a terrifying, enormous field of fire, and there was no way out for them. While the surviving natives were still rejoicing and hesitating, rows of tall metal magic machines stepped on the flames and pushed away the thick smoke, appearing in their sight in neat formations. They raised their arms horizontally, revealing black holes at the ends of their metal arms that were as thick as iron pillars. As he strode forward, he shot out beams of nearly transparent energy rays. Compared to the magical rays of various effects, the transparent energy rays were sharper and more penetrative. There was no elemental restriction, no magic immunity, and the pure energy rays were even more terrifying. Be it the tough skin of the trolls and ogres, the mortar armor of the boars, or the thick mane of the rhinos, none of them could stop the energy rays. Wherever the energy ray passed, a bloody hole would be pierced through the flesh. It was simply difficult to block or evade. For a moment, before the surviving natives could understand what was going on, they were riddled with holes by the invisible attacks, falling to the ground while covered in blood. Chapter 926. Not to mention the ignorant natives of Lance. Even the experienced dragons had never seen such a horrifying and bloody scene before. The Magic Machine Legion's ferocious volley created a beautiful ring of fire around the perimeter of the battle circle. Amidst the flames, countless pieces of flesh, dust, and gravel flew everywhere like bullets, with innumerable severed limbs and bodies among them. With just this attack, the charging natives of the plain had lost close to 10,000 people, and there were even more who were heavily injured. However, What made the Dragon Lords even more dumbfounded was that when the Ring of Fire cut the natives in half, rows of metal magic machines rushed out from the Magi's defensive line, sweeping away the natives inside the Ring of Fire, like a gale sweeping away fallen leaves. So what if they had thick skin and tenacious vitality like trolls and ogres? Under the concentrated rain of energy rays, they were instantly turned into sieves. Just as they struggled to pounce on the magic machine archers, their raised arms spat out a terrifyingly hot stream of flames that was close to 10 meters long. There were energy rays at a distance, and there were flamethrowers at a close distance. On top of that, there were indestructible iron bodies. The natives of Lance who had prided themselves on being strong finally fell helplessly against the magic machine army that was charging at them in unison. If even the powerful trolls and ogres ended up like this, the skinny gnolls, green devils, and kobolds were even more vulnerable. Their wooden and stone clubs, sharpened wooden javelins, and rocks used as throwing weapons were nothing in front of the magic machines that were armed to the teeth. Wooden clubs were swung, broken, javelins were thrown, broken, rocks were thrown, leaving white spots on the golden bodies of the natives. Soon, the natives who had nothing could only rely on their strong bodies and fearless bravery to fight. Unfortunately, bravery could not stop the energy rays, and their tough skin could not withstand the high temperature of the flames. Thus, on the battlefield, the natives were in a dilemma. If they charged forward, their weapons were inferior, and their defenses were inferior. They could only suffer the fate of being trampled. If he retreated, there would be a sea of fire behind him, and the tall magic machines were still closing in for a time. The inside of the Ring of Fire was filled with shrill howls and roars of pain. Tall figures fell to the ground one after another under the concentrated rays of light, and even more people were still fighting. Behind the rows of magic machines, the silhouettes of human wizards could be vaguely seen. They never stepped into the dangerous front lines of the battle. Instead, they patrolled the battlefield leisurely under the protection of layers of magical machinery. Whenever they saw a tough creature like the hairy rhinoceros charging left and right, knocking over a few magic machines, the wizards would sneer and approach it. Sorcery scrolls, instant magic wands, and spells of different colors were thrown at them. The big guys who were charging forward just a moment ago immediately felt their legs go soft, and they were surrounded by many magic machines. No one knew how long the war would last, so most wizards prepared a large number of witchcraft items to replace their own spells. In such a grand and cruel battlefield, it was best to preserve one's own strength as much as possible, using wizard beasts and puppets to wear down the enemy's strength. This was the way wizards were best at fighting. While the battle within the Ring of Fire was intense, the dense mass of natives outside the Ring of Fire were so frightened by the flames that they could not move forward. They did not have the extraordinary magic resistance of the giant dragons or draconians, and could not easily pass through the sea of fire without a scratch. There were even a few unlucky fellows who were pushed by their companions that kept surging in from behind, and they rushed into the sea of fire with faces full of fear, before turning into terrifying flaming men that howled mournfully. In that moment, the attacks of the natives actually stopped. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The giant dragons flying high in the blue sky cursed in a low voice, using earth-shattering roars to issue orders to the draconians that were mixed in with the natives. Tall and strong draconians lined up from the crowd, grabbing short and skinny natives and throwing them into the sea of fire. More than 10 draconians did the same, using the lives of the natives to force a path to the inside. Charge! All of you, charge in! As the draconians bellowed in unison, the burly natives followed suit, grabbing their skinny companions and throwing them into the sea of fire. Under the suppression of their tumbling and blood, the sea of fire before them actually showed signs of weakening. Seizing the chance, more natives swarmed in, enduring the pain of the flames as they waded through the sea of fire and rushed into the inner ring. In the distance, the goblin chariots were still firing fireballs 5 times a minute. But no matter how violent the bombardment or the sea of fire was, it could not stop the charge of the natives. driven by the giant dragons and draconians. More than 200,000 natives did not fear death or sacrifice, raising their spears and sticks high as they charged towards the metal magical equipment at the front lines of the battlefield. Hence, a close-range bloody slaughter unfolded. Still, as the instigators of the war, neither Grimm nor the giant dragons cared about the casualties on the battlefield. Wherever their attacks were obstructed, they would roar a few times, urging them to hurry up. Wherever the line of defense showed signs of loosening, they would order for backup. Although they seemed to be very concerned about the battlefield, deep in their hearts, they were nothing more than pawns that could be sacrificed at any time. As long as their sacrifice was worthwhile and could offset the other side's bargaining chips, the higher-ups of both sides would not care about who lived or died. On such a large battlefield, Grimm had already released his plague poison spirit and cast a toxic aura around the Magic Machine Legion. However, in such a tragic battlefield where life and death could be decided at every turn, a little more or a little less poison would not have any obvious effect. Still, many a little makes a mickle, and every native on the battlefield who died to poison would quickly decay and explode into balls of yellow-green poisonous fog, spreading it to even more enemies. A portion of their dead souls also transformed into a faint white light and gathered on the plague poison spirit's body, causing its soul aura to grow stronger and stronger. After following Grimm for so long, the plague poison spirit, which had fused with Grimm's soul, had never truly eaten its fill. Grimm had already become a Grade 3 Magus, but the plague poison spirit was still a Grade 2 advanced Magus. It was simply a disgrace to the name of soul equipment. Today, on this bloody battlefield, Grimm had finally given the plague poison spirit the right to slaughter to its heart's content. Also active on the battlefield were the insect Lich Bliss and a group of Crimson Magi. The insect Lich Bliss evolution method meant that it was not suited for battles between powerhouses. Instead, it was more suited for a chaotic battlefield like this. Groups of black beetles flapped their elytra wings, one large and one small, converging into a black torrent that charged left and right on the battlefield, continuously devouring and tearing apart the natives of the Lance Plain. As for the 5 Void Marauders and the 11 demonized mantises, they turned into a whirlwind that swept through the battlefield. On the smoky and chaotic battlefield, the natives who were bravely charging forward suddenly had their heads shot up into the sky, blood spurting out of their necks like a fountain. To the natives of the plains, Void Raiders who could use the plains to conceal themselves were like invisible demons. The natives could not even figure out the Void Raiders' location, and their lives were harvested one after another. As for the demonic mantises that only had the ability to conceal themselves with vegetation, they could only appear and disappear on the battlefield, relying on their extreme flying speed to rampage, killing one enemy after another in a frenzy. They purposely avoided the thick-skinned natives and focused on the weaker ones. That was why they could sweep through the battlefield and could not find any opponents. Medusa and Sharon the Manticore also stepped onto the battlefield with their subordinates, intercepting the fish that slipped through the net behind the metal magic machinery. Whether it was Medusa's snakehair arrows or Charon's low-altitude dives, they were enough to kill the natives without a sturdy stomach armor. Once in a while, when they encountered a powerful fellow, Medusa would not hesitate to use her origin power to cast Petrifying Gaze at close range, and the other party would stretch out their necks to be slaughtered. As the Crimson family expanded and grew stronger day by day, the two of them had fewer and fewer opportunities to fight. That was why they cherished the opportunity in front of them even more and fought with all their might. Meanwhile, the Grade 2 clone brain Jellu was perched on the back of the golem dragon that was like a huge metal platform, its body overflowing with thousands of energy chains that were as thin as swimming snakes. The golem dragon beneath it did not participate in the battle. Its body overflowed with energy chains that were similar to Jellu's, but there were more and more of them. These energy chains swam and extended, occasionally linking to the goblin chariots below or the goblin airships in the air. Whenever the energy chain was successfully linked, abundant magical energy would flow along the milky white chain into the target magic machine's body. It was because of Jellu and the golem dragon's continuous recharging that the hundreds of goblin chariots and thousands of metal magic machines could continuously kill and attack. Otherwise, such a high-intensity battle would have depleted the magical energy stored in their bodies. Meryl sat in the command hall of the patrol mothership, acting as the highest commander of the entire battlefield. Meanwhile, the Grade 2 Magi of the Crimson family, who specialized in combat and slaughter, stood on the flight deck of the patrol mothership, observing the dragons circling in the distance. In front of them were Grimm, Mary, Alice, and the elemental magic machine. Grimm had inserted the fire clone into the elemental magic machine to act as an alternative chip. As for himself, he stood straight on the edge of the deck, coldly glancing at the giant dragon lords that were hesitating to move forward. A battle of attrition? To be honest, ever since the Crimson family took control of the Goblin Plain, they had never suffered a loss in this aspect. Once the cannon fodder was exhausted to a certain extent, the giant dragons would no longer be able to sit still and step onto the battlefield. That would be the true start of today's battle. Chapter 9:27. This was an asymmetric planar war. Even though the natives surrounding the Sorcerer Expeditionary Force were 10 times the number of enemies, they still did not have the upper hand in the overall situation. There were even signs that they were being systematically slaughtered by the Magus Corps. If the Crimson family was still the same dozen sorcerers that ventured into another world by themselves, it was only a matter of time before they were wiped out by the onslaught of the natives. However, as the Crimson family established a powerful and complete system of Magus Corps, they now had the strength to withstand the repeated attacks of the sea of enemies. Realizing that the natives alone could not shake the defensive line established by the sorcerers, the Dragon Lords had no choice but to send in the Dragonborn army and the Dragon Worshippers. Strictly speaking, these two forces were the greatest cornerstones that allowed the Dragon Lords to successfully maintain their rule for thousands of years. However, now that the Dragon Lords were facing a crisis of survival, these capable subordinates had no choice but to fight for their lives. The participation of the Dragonborn and Dragon Worshippers immediately heated up the atmosphere on the battlefield. Previously, the Magus Corps could still maintain the front line outside the defensive line, using the metal magical machinery as the spearhead to kill the enemy from both long and short range. Meanwhile, the magical cannons on the goblin chariots acted as a net of firepower, bombarding the enemy's offensive line continuously to create forbidden zones for life. However, as the Dragonborn army charged into the front line and the Dragon Worshippers rained spells on the magical machinery, the metal magical machinery as the first line of defense could not hold on much longer. Hence, under Meryl's command, a large number of metal magical machinery began to retreat, replaced by roaring summoned creatures and newly concocted wizard beasts. With their strength, it was obvious that they could not withstand the attacks of the Dragonborn and Dragon Worshippers. Hence, the outer defensive line became increasingly unstable and on the verge of collapse. However, just as the Dragonborn and Dragon Worshippers mixed in with the natives and frantically tore at the sorcerer's defensive line, above their heads, the patrol motherships and all the goblin airships were already in position, revealing their pitch-black cannons. In the next second, 1,000 cannons were fired simultaneously. An even larger ring of flames appeared around the sorcerer's defensive line. This wasn't the effect of some kind of spell, but the spectacular sight of thousands of fireballs exploding at the same time. In order to maximize the effect of the attack, the wizards used summoned creatures and wizard beasts to lure the Draconids and Dragon Worshippers to the vicinity of the strangulation line. Then, after precise calculations, they carried out the indiscriminate barrage of firepower. And the killing effect they formed was also abnormally shocking. With this single all-out attack, they had killed nearly 30% of the Dragonians and nearly half of the Dragon Worshippers. As for the natives, no one paid any attention to them. In any case, their numbers were definitely not small. Such a ferocious energy attack also shocked the dragon overlords. They knew in their hearts that if such a violent energy attack had landed on their heads, it would have been difficult for the Tier 1 little dragons to escape unscathed. If one was unlucky and got hit by 5 or more energy fireballs simultaneously, not only would the Tier 1 dragons die instantly, but the Tier 2 dragons would also vomit 3 liters of blood. Perhaps only a Tier 3 dragon would be able to survive such a brutal battlefield with ease. As for the other colossal dragons, they could only pray for themselves. However, the colossal dragons were all simple-minded creatures with trembling muscles. After such a long period of observation, they quickly discovered some of the flaws of the sorcerer's camp. Every time a large-scale attack was launched, the density of the cannons on the sorcerer's defensive line would drop for half an hour. Although there were metal magical machines on the ground supporting the front line, compared to before, the enemy's firepower was still reduced by more than 40%. Moreover, the colossal dragons quickly locked onto a key figure. It was neither the invincible insect, Lich Bliss, on the ground, nor the domineering Tier 3 human sorcerer on the cruiser mothership. Instead, it was the 3-meter-tall metal golem that was protected by both the puppet dragon and the cruiser mothership. Looking at the snake-like energy chains that slithered around its body and how it continuously charged all the magical machines on the battlefield, it was obvious that the sorcerer's side was able to defend against the repeated attacks of enemies that were 100 times their size with such a small number of people. To put it bluntly, it was the golem that supported the entire magical machine legion. Therefore, the colossal dragons circled around, trying their best to find a loophole in the sorcerer's camp's defense while roaring loudly and discussing the subsequent battle strategy. The 5 Tier 3 colossal dragons in the team had undoubtedly become the core of the entire group of colossal dragons. Amidst their almost quarrelsome roars and roars, a simple and straightforward battle plan was quickly formed. There were no conspiracies, no calculations. It was simple and violent, filled with the self-righteous aesthetics of violence of the colossal dragons. Sure enough, after half an hour, following another large-scale barrage of firepower, a huge ring of death appeared in the battlefield. The appearance of this ring of death was like a horn for the colossal dragons to charge. With a series of short and clear dragon roars, hundreds of colossal dragons converged into a sea of dragons, flapping their wings and roaring as they charged towards the cruiser. In order to avoid being caught in a pincer attack from the cruiser and the golem dragons, most of the colossal dragons flew extremely high, preparing to use the cruiser's hull to block the attacks of the golem dragons. A distance of 5 to 6 miles might be far enough for a normal human, but for the colossal dragons flying high in the blue sky, it would only take them 2 flaps of their wings. The middle-grade and high-grade sorcerers of the Crimson family who had been waiting on the cruiser all narrowed their eyes, their hearts beating wildly. Grimm took a step forward and said in a low voice, "I'll go out with Mary to hold them back. You guys rely on the cruiser to fight. Remember, don't go more than half a mile away from the cruiser." Alice, who was wearing a starry robe, took a step forward and pointed at Grimm and Mary with the resplendent scepter of prophecy in her hand. 2 mysterious and beautiful stars in the sky fused into their bodies. Omen of destiny. It was a mysterious buff that could not be described with words. Every time a life-threatening danger came, the individual who received the blessing of Omen of Destiny would be able to sense the direction and degree of danger in advance. In terms of power level, the blessing of Omen of Destiny was more accurate and clearer than the normal sense of danger and foresight. And that was not the end. Either with the help of the cards of destiny or by focusing on casting spells, Alice managed to buff Grimm and Mary with Luck, Shield of Destiny, and Shield of Faith in just a few seconds. The little elemental fairy Helen also waved her little magic wand and buffed Grimm and Mary with Super Resistance, Rapid Response, Elemental Nullification Barrier, and a few other types of buffs and elemental barriers. Together with Grimm's Lava Armor, Lava Shield, and a dozen Flame Shields, as well as Mary's Blood Chi Protection, the two of them were surrounded by light. The beautiful magic aura and the flying elemental shields collided with each other, and dazzling magic sparks scattered in the air. After looking at each other, Grimm stepped forward and grabbed Mary's waist. In the next second, the two of them disappeared in a huge cluster of flames that soared into the sky. The flames exploded, and the light reached the sky. Grimm and Mary appeared in the path of the dragon's charge. After looking at each other again, the two of them suddenly separated. Dozens of dragon breaths of different colors and attributes quickly swallowed the afterimages they left behind. Grimm was flying at high speed. In fact, this was no longer considered flying. Instead, he was gliding through the air with the help of the dozens of tiny flame jets installed on his magma armor. That was why Grimm's flying speed was several times faster than a normal fly spell. No matter how arrogant he was, he did not dare to charge into the middle of the dragons. Instead, he chose to maneuver around the periphery of the group and use lava fireballs to disrupt their flying rhythm. The 5-level, 3 dragons might be able to ignore the instant lava fireball of a level 3 fire wizard, but the other dragons could not. If the level 1 dragons were caught in the explosion of the lava fireball, they would instantly be burnt black and fall from the sky, screaming in pain. Even the level 2 dragons would pay a terrible price if they were hit by the lava fireball. Therefore, the order of the huge black group of dragons was disrupted by Grimm's appearance. All the level 1 dragons dodged, while the level 2 dragons circled around and retaliated with short but powerful dragon breaths. Only the 5-level 3 dragons roared and rushed forward, trying to close the distance between them and Grimm. It had to be said that the number of dragons was too large, and it was a big burden for them. Grimm could charge around the periphery of the group of dragons. As long as he avoided the 5-level 3 dragons, the other dragons could not do anything to him. The 5-level 3 dragons, on the other hand, had to avoid the panicking level 1 dragons. They were teased by Grimm into playing a game of cat and mouse in the sky. In just 20 to 30 seconds, 3 of the young dragons were hit by Grimm's lava fireballs and fell from the sky. As for the other dragons, they were burned by the flames and injured by the lava fragments. On the other side of the battlefield, the Blood Queen Mary had transformed into a blood-red demon and charged into the middle of the group of dragons. Relying on her agile body, she struck out with her bloody claws, tearing the young dragons into pieces and causing them to groan in pain. The 5-level 3 dragons had no choice but to split up and lead 7 or 8-level 2 dragons to chase after Mary, using their furious dragon breaths to destroy the illusionary bloody afterimages one after another. Chapter 928. The strength of the Dragon Clan was renowned throughout the multiverse. Be it in melee combat, mid-range dragon breath, or long-range dragon spells, all of them were sharp and powerful. Under normal circumstances, a dragon could easily crush 3 to 5 human spellcasters of the same tier. This could be seen from the encounters of the few vampire sorcerers. 2 blood knights and 3 tier 2 blood elves gathered in a group and roamed around the periphery of the dragon horde. Whenever they caught a dragon, they would give it a good beating. Those tier 1 young dragons that encountered them were like lambs in a tiger's den. However, once they encountered a tier 2 dragon, this small group of vampire sorcerers would have kicked an iron plate. The sharp attacks of the 2 blood knights might be able to injure the tier 2 dragon, but their defense was much weaker than the dragons. As for the 3 blood elves, they were completely defeated in terms of attack, defense, evasion, and magic resistance. Instead, they became the targets of the tier 2 dragon's pursuit. If not for the force field protection provided by the cruiser mothership, the 3 blood elves would have been annihilated by the furious dragon breaths of the tier 2 dragon. In order to fight against the dragon horde, a translucent force field protection rose around the cruiser mothership. The dragon breaths and long-range dragon spells collided with the force field protection like fireflies, but they could not damage the ship in the slightest. All the Scarlet Sorcerers who participated in the battle also had a small force field protection covering their bodies, with a defense of 700 degrees. Moreover, Whenever the force field protection was on the verge of shattering, all the Scarlet Sorcerers had to do was hide within the force field protection of the cruiser mothership. Their own force field protection could be quickly restored by Gru's energy chain. This was equivalent to giving every Tier 2 Scarlet Sorcerer a Tier 3 defensive spell. Moreover, it was a regenerative spell. As long as they did not venture too deep into the dragon horde and were not surrounded by a large number of dragons, their lives would not be in too much danger. With this layer of protection, the Tier 2 Scarlet Sorcerers who participated in the battle appeared to be exceptionally brave and dared to fight. Even those who usually liked to hide behind the meat shields and cast spells were now on the front lines, fighting bravely like warriors. On the other hand, the puppet dragon that was silently observing the battle in the sky, with its head held high on the ground, its broad and scaly back was wriggling. Goblin dragon cannons with a diameter of 3 meters rose from the belly of the airship. They adjusted their muzzles according to the movements of the dragons in the sky. There were 2 reasons why it hadn't attacked yet. Firstly, the dragons were too far away. If it attacked now, the dragons could easily dodge its attacks. Secondly, the 5 Tier 3 dragons hadn't entered their optimal attack range yet. If it attacked now, it could easily startle the dragons. Although Grim and Mary had managed to pin down the Tier 3 dragons, they still needed the Golem dragon, who was a true Tier 4 existence, to take them down. However, this also showed the difference in strength between Grim and Mary. In a fair fight, with the help of his elemental machinery, Grim could hold off any Tier 3 dragon. If he encountered a dragon that wasn't adept at flying or escaping, Grim had a 70% chance of killing it. As for Mary, she could also fight any Tier 3 dragon fairly and not be at a disadvantage. However, the final result would be a draw. Neither side could do anything to the other. The dragons couldn't catch up to Mary, and Mary couldn't deal enough damage to the dragons. After all, the vampires weren't known for their attack power. This was due to their class and talent. No one could do anything about it. However, if Mary could obtain a powerful wizard tool that was compatible with her origin attribute, she could immediately solve this problem of her weak attack power. Otherwise, if Mary wanted to gain a foothold among the Tier 3 vampires, she could only hope to raise her current Tier 2 vampires to Tier 3 and gain an advantage by fighting as a group. As for obtaining Tier 3 vampires through the Embrace, it was a good idea. However, if it was carried out, it would definitely drain Mary's origin blood. At this point, Mary finally understood why the top-tier vampires in the sorcerer world didn't use the Embrace to create a faction that was completely loyal to them. Instead, they used the primitive method of reproduction to continue their bloodline. At the end of the day, it was still because of the origin blood. Mary used the Embrace to create 5 Tier 2 vampires and a number of Tier 1 vampires. Therefore, these low and mid-tier vampires would be controlled by her origin blood. Without Mary's approval and unlocking, none of her vampires would be able to successfully advance. This was her authority as the Blood Master. However, if she embraced too many vampires at once, it would increase her own power greatly, but would also bring a heavy burden to the origin blood. This burden would also affect Mary's speed of improvement and the threshold for advancement. Therefore, in order to reduce the burden of the origin blood and cultivate qualified vampires, most vampire families still used the primitive method of reproduction to raise the next generation. Only when there were especially outstanding bloodline descendants, the Blood Master of the family would make an exception and give them the Embrace, making them their loyal lackeys. If Mary was strong enough now, she could even directly promote a Tier 2 vampires to Tier 3 through the blessing of blood. However, such a heaven-defying operation would consume too much origin blood, so it would only happen in the latter half of Mary's advancement to Tier 3. At that time, Mary's origin blood would be sufficiently nurtured, and she had no hope of advancing. Only then would such a strange situation occur. Otherwise, no Blood Master would be willing to share the origin blood that he had painstakingly nurtured on a hopeless subordinate. The bloody battle in the sky continued. On the ground, it was a world of blood and fire. The dragonoid warriors roared as they charged forward. The tall and sturdy ogres charged forward. The sinister dragon worshippers who hid among the natives and shot arrows at them. The sturdy giant demons who were covered in blood as they charged forward. The short rat men who were squeaking and throwing stones at them. Amidst the flying flames and incessant explosions, the slaves commanded by the giant dragons fought with all their might against the metal magic machinery. Energy rays cut through the sky, and streams of flames several meters long sprayed out, burning the enemies until they screamed in pain. The metal magic machinery shot wildly while waving its huge iron fists to fight against the enemies. The battle at the scene was brutal and bloody, and the horrifying scenes were unbearable to look at. Metal magic machines charged into the dense crowd of people, causing a huge wave of blood to flow. The Aborigines charged forward one after another, the wooden and stone clubs in their hands shattering on the metal magic machinery, but they would be smashed by the ferocious iron fists, their heads bleeding and stomachs pierced. If there were too many Aborigines gathered, the metal magic machinery would simply spit out high-temperature flames, turning all living beings in the surroundings into human-shaped torches. The battlefield would once again become a horrifying purgatory on Earth. Even the crudest stone club, if it was smashed by a troll or ogre, the metal magic machinery would suffer the same fate as a human, with broken bones and broken limbs. If the attacks exceeded the limits of the metal magic machinery, the metal magic machinery would also die. However, the magic machinery armory had established a complete charging and maintenance system. Hence, the metal magic machinery that was too heavily damaged would retreat to the defense line, and the goblin technicians there would quickly repair it. Hence, both sides suffered heavy losses, but the magical mechanical legion still managed to pin down the natives of the plain with this thin line of strangulation. Seriously speaking, the greatest threat to the magic machinery armory was still the dragonoid warriors. They had strength, equipment, and spells. They were almost a perfect type of warrior. The only thing restricting them was the difficulty of nurturing them and their pitiful numbers. On the battlefield today, there were at least 3,000 dragonoid warriors of various attributes active. If they were allowed to form an army and charge, it would undoubtedly destroy the magic machinery armory's defense line. Fortunately, the goblin chariots at the back of the magic machinery armory were strong enough, and the ferocious energy fireballs were practically chasing after the dragonoid warriors' butts, giving them no chance to form an army. Using metal magic machinery to deal with the dragonoid warriors was undoubtedly too disadvantageous, so the Grade 1 Magi of the Crimson family became the main force to kill the dragonoid warriors. Dragonoid Zacha and Goblin Tiggerly were not adept at flying, so they could only retreat from the sky battlefield and run to the ground battlefield to slaughter the dragonoid warriors with Bug Lich Bliss. Arms and Edina were also with them. They were dragons, after all. Even though they had betrayed the dragon race, it was still a little embarrassing for them to fight with their own kind. To avoid the awkwardness, the two of them could only transform into human forms and run to the ground to slaughter the dragonoid and aborigines. With them around, even the Grade 2 dragonoid warriors could not cause too much trouble. Arms would charge straight at any Grade 2 dragonoid that caused too much trouble. At close range, the dragonoid warriors would be suppressed, and their limbs would go limp and their spirits would scatter. Arms would then slap them, and no matter what grade they would all bleed and their eyes would be filled with stars. The dragonoid warriors of the Lance Plain, no matter which dragon lord they belonged to, all had a fundamental flaw, and that was their fear of dragonoid might. This was an unwritten rule set by the dragon race to prevent the dragonoids from going out of control, and all dragon lords strictly followed it. Compared to the cruelty and bloodshed of the battle on the ground, the battle in the sky seemed a little lacking. The dragons that participated in the battle, regardless of whether they were Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3, were all dragon lords that lived like princes. If they were asked to plunder resources, plunder wealth, and plunder beauties, they might give it their all. However, if they were asked to fight a bloody battle against powerful magi without any fear of death, This was a little difficult for even the strongest of dragons. Based on what they knew, if hundreds of giant dragons gathered together, they would definitely be able to destroy the sorcerers in front of them like they were crushing dry weeds. However, when they entered the battlefield, they were horrified to discover that the magi before them were all cunning and treacherous, and their attacks were so painful when they landed on their bodies. Chapter 9:29. The strength of a Tier 3 wizard was not something that could be easily described with words. Despite being attacked by the dragons, Grimm, who was fully armed, was still alive and kicking. He seemed to be enjoying his life. The three Tier 3 dragons following closely behind him were the Silver Dragon Alfred, the Shadow Dragon Atlan, and the Water Dragon Dominic. Of the three, only the Silver Dragon Alfred could barely keep up with Grimm's speed. The Shadow Dragon Atlan and the Water Dragon Dominic were not adept at flying, so they were left far behind. After a period of fruitless pursuit, the three dragons discussed among themselves and decided to have the Silver Dragon continue chasing after Grimm so that he would not have time to kill the low-tier dragons. The Shadow Dragon and Water Dragon, on the other hand, turned around and pounced on the patrol mothership not far away. Since the start of the battle, the force field barrier erected by the patrol mothership had blocked countless dragon breaths, and there was some visible damage on it. Some Tier 2 dragons, eager to hunt, swarmed into the mothership and charged onto the mothership's huge flight deck. Here, the hordes of metal magic machinery and the concentrated fire from the fixed cannon turrets were enough to make them suffer. However, the thing that shocked them the most was the strange puppet that was covered in magical flames and had a body of steel. It actually possessed both the elemental attacks of a magical creature and the sturdy body of a metal construct. It was capable of both close and long-range attacks. The two Tier 2 dragons were thrown to the ground, their bones broken and their tendons torn. Then, it dragged them into the belly of the ship. Only then did the dragons snap out of their daze. That was a Tier 3 magic machinery. With such a powerful fellow guarding the flight deck and the belly of the ship, it would be difficult for the low-tier dragons to get past the Tier 3 magic machinery, no matter how hard they tried. "Hold it back. I'll go in and take a look." The Shadow Dragon Atlan growled, and its body suddenly exploded into a cloud of black smoke, disappearing without a trace. Its companion, the Water Dragon Dominic, roared loudly and charged at the elemental magic machinery. The Water Dragon, also known as the White Dragon, was a water-type dragon that was naturally adept at controlling the water element. The Ice Dragon that Grimm had hunted was just a variant and a branch of the Water Dragon. Seriously speaking, water dragons were not good at fighting. Their physical strength was not as good as that of fire dragons, earth dragons, and other dragons. But just like the water element, water dragons were especially good at spitting mist and slowing down their opponents. This habit gave them the right to attack first in battle. Therefore, as soon as the Water Dragon Dominique rushed onto the flight deck of the patrol mothership, large clouds of water vapor spread out from its diamond-like body and quickly spread in all directions along the metal deck. Its huge body immediately became almost transparent, completely blending into the mist. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Dozens of energy rays and 5 energy fireballs quickly swept past the Water Dragon's position, but they did not touch anything solid. The huge fireball that was formed from the explosion of the fireball could not trigger the elemental oscillation like before. After the fireball flashed, it strangely and quickly dimmed. Like a damp firecracker, it made a huge commotion at first, but in the end, it was just a dull fart. But just as everyone was bewildered, the Water Dragon with skin, flesh, and scales that were almost transparent suddenly appeared at the edge of the rolling mist, sweeping its tail at one of the metal cannons fixed at the edge of the deck. Amidst a loud explosion, the metal cannons instantly stopped firing. The entire metal frame and magic cannons deformed beyond recognition. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Another series of mana rays and energy fireballs shot towards him. But the Grade 3 Water Dragon twisted its body and dove into the mist, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The next time it appeared, It was at the edge of the mist, charging straight into a small group of metal magic machinery, tearing and clawing with its mouth, stomping with its giant feet, and swinging its tail. It actually used only 6 or 7 fingers to tear apart 5 of the metal magic machinery, smashing them into a pile of scrap metal. Then, the water dragon withstood the concentrated bombardment of energy rays and fireballs, turning around and hiding in the mist, disappearing after a moment. Even Meryl, who had always prided herself on being calm and collected, was currently cursing in the command hall of the patrol mothership. Under her loud urging and cursing, streaks of dense detection ripples and life force scanners, as well as many indescribable strange witchcraft ripples quickly swept across the vast dense fog. However, she did not sense or discover any traces of the enemy. Without a sound, an inconspicuous metal cabin on the flight deck suddenly opened. A Grade 1 Crimson Magus peeked out and tore 7 spell scrolls in one go. Wind Creation, Wind Tornado, Doomsday Storm. Rank 1 to 3 wind element spells were available, and every single one of them was powerful and had powerful effects. Unfortunately, the huge mist that covered the entire flight deck seemed to be made of lead. No matter how many tornadoes and gales wreaked havoc, they could only tear apart or disperse a portion of the mist. When the gales stopped, the mist from all directions converged again, turning the place into a hazy mist once more. It was difficult to see one's own fingers. Seeing that it was ineffective, the Crimson Magus turned around and tried to escape. However, the mist in front of the metal cabin trembled, and a transparent water dragon suddenly appeared, slamming its claws on the translucent force field outside the cabin. The powerful dragon claws caused the translucent force field to cave in, the sharp claws even piercing through the protective layer of the metal cabin, creating dazzling sparks and deep claw marks. If not for the protective force field of the patrol mothership, no matter how many defensive spells the Crimson Magus cast, it would be useless. The violent impact sent the Crimson Magus flying into the metal cabin. Blood spurted out of his mouth as he struggled to escape into the hull of the ship. Water Dragon Dominic's long dragon tail swept fiercely on the metal cabin, and with an ear-piercing explosion, the metal cabin was smashed into a metal plate. However, the Crimson Magus had successfully escaped. Taking advantage of the moment when Water Dragon Dominic attacked the metal cabin, the elemental magic machine that had been patrolling the flight deck in search of the enemy quickly rushed over. Before the heavy metal fist arrived, the violent magical energy had already engulfed the water dragon's body. Looking at the position of the elemental magic machine, it was obvious that it wanted to cut off the water dragon's path of retreat and prevent it from returning to the mist. Water Dragon Dominic obviously wanted to lure the elemental magic machine away from the main entrance of the flight deck, so it did not rush back into the mist. Instead, it swayed its body and spat out a transparent pillar of water at the surging magical energy. 2 magical energies of different attributes collided in midair, triggering a violent elemental explosion. In an earth-shattering wave of elemental energy, the dragon and the magic machine fought in the air while rapidly approaching each other. Asterisk dong dong dong. Asterisk a series of explosions sounded, and the elemental magic machine's reinforced iron fists bombarded the water dragon's wave shield, causing water to splatter and ripple. On the other hand, the water dragon lowered its head and used the sharp dragon horns on its head to stab and clash with the elemental magic machine. The elemental magic machine's 2 iron fists grabbed the water dragon's horns tightly, and the two rolled and fought on the flight deck. For a moment, the dragon's roar was endless, and the entire flight deck was turned upside down. It was difficult to calm down. As the dragon and the magical machine fought, the main entrance of the patrol mothership's flight deck suddenly opened, and up to 30 metal magical machines rushed out of it. As they approached the battlefield, they fired at the water dragons in a frenzy. Under their interference, the water dragon was annoyed, and the elemental magic machine seemed to be tilting the situation. However, outside of everyone's perception, a strange shadow force that no one could detect was slowly flowing in the shadow of a metal cannon on the flight deck. Shadow Dragon Atlan looked around the battlefield and hesitated for a moment. If it went to help Water Dragon Dominic at this time, it would definitely help it establish an advantage. However, the best choice now was actually to barge into this huge metal spaceship and kill the human magi hiding inside. That was the true meaning of today's battle. After understanding this, the Shadow Dragon turned to look at the main entrance. The shadow force in its body moved slightly, and its body suddenly appeared under the human magi closest to the main entrance from the shadow of the metal cannon. At this moment, the main entrance leading to the interior of the metal spaceship was close at hand. As long as it struggled, it could break through the translucent force field outside the other party's door and enter smoothly. At the thought that most of the other party's main forces had already left, leaving only a few small fries inside, and no one could stop its frenzied slaughter, Shadow Dragon Atlan's heart could not help but pound violently. Ready, attack! However, just as the Shadow Dragon was about to go all out to break through the force field, the human magi it was hiding suddenly lowered her head and smiled at the shadow under her. The smile was so beautiful and so brilliant that Atlan fell into a trance for a moment. This level 2 human sorceress was so beautiful. Is she smiling at me? These two thoughts appeared in Atlan's mind in succession, but it suddenly became alert in an instant. No, she's already discovered me. To be honest, before the shadow jump, Shadow Dragon Atlan had already used its all-pervasive and unpredictable mental perception to scan the entire patrol mothership, but it did not find any living individuals that could threaten it. That was why it jumped over boldly and wanted to rush into the mothership. As for the female Magus it chose, she was only a Tier 2 Magus. The elemental fluctuations in her body were almost undetectable, so she should not be able to threaten it at all. However, the scene in front of it frightened it, and it vaguely sensed a trace of a trap. Chapter 9:30. As the name suggested, the Shadow Dragon was also one of the mutated dragons. Although they were known as the Dragon Clan, they were more like a powerful shadow creature if one were to look closely. They had dark scales, and the surface of their huge and hideous bodies was constantly emitting a dense and obscure shadow aura. Black dragon horns, black dragon body, black dragon wings, black dragon claws, and black dragon tail. Even the dragon breath they spat out was black. It was precisely because of these strange magical characteristics that the Dark Shadow Dragon became the best at stealth. Although their bodies were as large as hills, they could blend into a palm-sized back or shadow. Moreover, before they launched their attack, very few people would be able to detect where exactly they were hiding in the shadows. But today, the Shadow Dragon Atlan was clearly unlucky, because it actually chose to hide in the shadow of the destiny which Alice. Its every move could indeed hide from most level 3 creatures, but could not hide from Alice, who was standing near the main entrance. Through destiny perception, Alice had long been aware of the existence of the Shadow Dragon Atlan. Hence, she pretended to be harmless and stood alone next to the main entrance. When the Shadow Dragon Atlan fell into trouble, Alice smiled faintly and successfully launched the Destiny Witchcraft with the help of the elemental sprite Helen. The Cloister of Fate. It was a confinement labyrinth-type Destiny Witchcraft that required Alice to touch the body of the target creature to be successfully launched, imprisoning it in a mysterious and huge labyrinth. This labyrinth would not cause any harm to the enemy, and would only trap them inside for a quarter of an hour. If the enemy could see through the secret of the Cloister of Fate, or break through with brute force, there was a high chance that they would break out in advance. However, this amount of time was enough for Alice to do something. Hence, just when the Shadow Dragon Atlan felt that something was wrong and was about to burst out with full force, there was a flash of light before its eyes, and its entire body was already on a winding bluestone pontoon bridge. On both sides of the stone bridge, clouds and mist lingered, as if the entire pontoon bridge was built in the void. Looking around, there was nothing else in this huge void except for the winding pontoon bridges. At the end of each floating bridge, one could vaguely see a door of light standing quietly. Light rippled on top of the door, as if they were connected to each other. The dark shadow dragon Atlan was slightly taken aback. He scanned the world in front of him, and a familiar feeling arose in his heart. It seemed like it had heard of a similar space in another world. Teleportation and flying spells were forbidden there, and intruders were only allowed to try one light door at a time. The dark shadow dragon was slightly shocked. Its body sank, but nothing happened. Damn it, I can no longer sense the existence of a shadow world here. With Atlan's Tier 3 strength, he could have used the close connection between his soul, origin, and the shadow world as a springboard to return to Lance. But strangely, in this mysterious magic corridor, it could no longer sense the shadow world. The dark shadow dragon tried to flap its wings again, but its body couldn't rise any higher after floating for 1 meter. It seemed that even flying and levitation were forbidden in this world. The dark shadow dragon Atlan's expression instantly darkened. It finally remembered what this place was. The Corridor of Fate. This was the Corridor of Fate. Without the guidance of fate, anyone who entered the Corridor of Fate could only silently wait for themselves to be sent back. Atlan finally lowered his head, dejectedly, and crawled down. The roar of the dark shadow dragon Atlan before it left made Alice dizzy, and her body trembled. It took Alice more than 10 fingers to barely break free from the mighty firebird. Although she used some tricks to trap the dark shadow dragon into the Corridor of Fate, the difference in strength between the two was still there. If Alice had Tier 3 strength, she could have trapped the dark shadow dragon in the Corridor of Fate for at least an hour. It wouldn't be like now, where she only had a mere 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, the dark shadow dragon would be sent back to where it came from by the power of fate. At that time, an enraged Tier 3 dark shadow dragon would reappear in the shadows below Alice. She would have to pray for her own good then. Therefore, Alice rushed into the patrol mothership without hesitation. While running towards the lower levels, she quickly communicated with Meryl through witchcraft. Hurry up and open that magic prison. I need it now. After all, Alice was a delicate and weak witch of fate. All her elemental powers had been sacrificed to the power of fate, causing her physique to be extremely weak. If it weren't for the elemental elf, Helen, who was flying beside her and buffing her with the Gale's spell and the bull's strength, Alice wouldn't have been able to reach the magic prison at the bottom of the patrol mothership in time with her speed. The Crimson family had originally come for the WIRMS. In order to capture more spoils of war, they had specially built some magic prisons on the patrol mothership to imprison and seal the WIRMS. And the place that Alice was running towards was one of the prisons used to imprison high-level giant dragons. 147, 146, 145. While quickly counting, Alice sprinted at full speed. The winding metal tunnels were one after another. From time to time, she even had to rush down some spiral metal staircases. 68, 67, 66, 32, 31, 30. When Alice counted 15, the magic prison was finally in sight. Some metal magic machinery had already opened the door of the prison, and a few crimson sorcerers were hurriedly activating the sealing spell formation inside. Alice ran into the magic prison in one breath and stood in the middle of the slowly operating spell formation that was faintly emitting magical light. The elemental elf that accompanied her day and night was waving a small magic wand, quickly activating all the spell formations in the magic prison and connecting them one by one. 8, 7, 6, 5. The little elf waved her hands and kicked all the crimson sorcerers and magic machinery out, allowing her to completely control the control center of the magic prison. 4, 3, 2. The little magic wand in the little elf's hand lit up with a dazzling milky white light. The entire sealing spell formation was eager to try, but it was still in a state of activation. If it wasn't for the fact that the controller was a high-level elemental creature like the little elf, normal wizards would never be able to control such a complicated sealing spell formation. 1. Following Alice's sharp cry, the shadow beneath her suddenly erupted with power, and a gigantic dragon-shaped creature abruptly emerged. Hugo, the shadow dragon Atlan, who had been imprisoned in the corridor of fate for a quarter of an hour, was beyond furious. It, a dignified Grade 3 giant dragon, had actually been tricked by a Grade 2 human, which without even realizing it. How could it not be enraged? How could it not roar? Therefore, as soon as it sensed the fluctuation of spatial energy and the witch's aura close at hand, the shadow dragon Atlan instantly, before its surging shadow power could truly erupt, its huge spiritual perception scanned its current surroundings. Damn it, this is before the final word die could be uttered. A powerful sealing force surged up and sealed it, along with the Grade 2 witch, into the spell formation. No matter how strong the Grade 3 shadow dragon was, it could not compete with the sealing spell formation. Moreover, the large magic furnace on the patrol mothership provided energy for the sealing spell formation, and the controller of the formation was a high-level elemental elf. Therefore, the shadow dragon Atlan's roar came to an abrupt halt. Its entire body and its huge shadow power, as well as its spiritual undulations and thoughts, were instantly imprisoned. In order to not let this fellow escape, Alice was willing to sacrifice herself and was sealed as well. Looking at the shadow dragon and Alice, who were stiff and motionless like statues in the seal, the elemental elf Helen could only sigh secretly. She carefully protected the seal and closed the magic prison. With her and Alice's strength, this was the most they could do. After all, they were facing a Grade 3 giant dragon. Being able to sacrifice Alice to seal this Grade 3 giant dragon was already a commendable result. Now, it would depend on whether Grimm had the ability to rescue Alice without letting the Grade 3 shadow dragon escape. Otherwise, a single mistake could result in the destruction of the god's soul. When little Helen flapped her transparent membrane wings and flew back to the command hall, she was met with Meryl's inquiring eyes. "That Grade 3 giant dragon has been sealed," little Helen said listlessly. That's good. Right. Where's Lady Alice?" Meryl patted her chest in relief and asked curiously. "She's sealed together with that giant dragon." Little Helen pouted and flew back and forth in the air anxiously. Alice wants to help so much that she has to choose such a dangerous way. What's so good about that big guy that she's willing to risk her life to capture that shadow dragon? The more she spoke, the angrier she became. Little Helen actually waved her magic wand and formed a miniature version of Grimm in the air. She then pounced on it and started punching and kicking it, leaving Meryl speechless. At this moment, the battle on the patrol mothership was gradually reaching its climax. The shadow dragon left and did not return, waiting for the other party to make a move. This undoubtedly made the water dragon Dominic more and more irritated and suspicious. After a bloody battle, the water dragon Dominic had to admit that it could not beat the strange puppet in front of it in melee combat. Be it the sturdiness of its body or its mighty divine strength, this strange puppet was superior to it. Coupled with the annoying metal magic machinery that kept harassing it and the continuous attacks of the metal cannons, the water dragon Dominic was actually defeated in melee combat with the strange puppet. Chapter 9:31. The water dragon Domineer had fallen, and the reason for its fall was not because of the elemental magic machinery's advance, but because it was killed by the golem dragon's giant goblin cannons. From a moment it set foot on the flight deck of the cruiser mothership, two giant goblin cannons with a 3-meter diameter rose from the spacious metal platform on the golem dragon's back. Originally, all the battles took place on the flight deck of the cruiser mothership. The golem dragon's giant goblin cannons were indiscriminate energy attacks, so it could only wait for an opportunity. And the water dragon Domineer's retreat gave the golem dragon a chance to show off its strength. Under the entanglement of the elemental magic machinery and the metal puppets, the water dragon relied on its valiance to carve out a path of blood, smashing through the cruiser mothership's force field defense and charging into the sky. And it was this action of breaking through the force field defense that brought disaster to it. The force field defense around the cruiser mothership had a defensive strength of 600 to 700 degrees. Even with the powerful body of the Grade 3 water dragon, it could not avoid being frozen for as long as 3 seconds after smashing through it. Seizing the 3 seconds in the air, the 2 giant goblin cannons of the golem dragon that were standing under the mothership shook at the same time, and 2 earth-shattering energy beams struck the bloody chest and abdomen of the water dragon domineer. The wave shield around the water dragon's body had already turned into a mist after the previous collision. Therefore, the energy beams hit the water dragon's huge body without any obstruction. The last layer of dragon scales on the water dragon's body only lasted for half a second before it was penetrated, and the 2 energy beams shot into the sky and disappeared into the distance. The water dragon domineer did not even have the time to cry out in surprise before its body was completely invaded by the terrifying magical energy, and its dragon soul was instantly annihilated in the overwhelming waves of energy. The diamond-like, translucent, and beautiful body staggered and fell from the sky headfirst. All the dragons and natives on the vast battlefield witnessed this scene with their own eyes. Under their fearful gazes, a previously high and mighty tier, 3 giant dragon fell without a sound. The dragons flying high in the sky followed the 2 white pillars of light that pierced through the sky and cast their eyes on the huge metal dragon that stood proudly. Although his every move was so clumsy and rigid, and although his appearance was so crude and ugly, every dragon's gaze was filled with unconcealable fear and shock at this very moment. And when they looked at the puppet dragon again, their gazes were a little different. Tier 4. After all, this was a Grade 4 magic machine. The strength of a Grade 4 magical machine could only be verified by the weak whimpers of a Grade 3 creature. Perhaps the dragons of the past were too conceited, thinking that they could rely on absolute numbers and skillful combat skills to deal with this clumsy and crude giant. Now, however, the death of a Tier 3 dragon lord had awakened them. Tier 4 will always be Tier 4. Only another Tier 4 player could deal with a Tier 4 player. Without hesitation, the dragons began to turn around. Shrill and panicked cries resounded in the sky, and the dragons in the sky began to retreat. On the ground, the dragonids, dragon worshippers, and natives who were still fighting the magic machines and sorcerers were all at a loss. They did not know if they should continue to attack or retreat with the dragons. The entire battlefield immediately fell into chaos. At this moment, the sorcerer expeditionary force that had been bitterly resisting the attacks of the enemies began to counterattack. The remaining 400 or so metal magic machines surged out and began to fire wildly at any target that didn't belong to them within their field of vision. A large number of eyeball mechs also swarmed out, whizzing through the air while shooting dazzling rays of heat into the crowd. The sorcerer expeditionary force's counterattack was like the last straw, finally crushing the hesitant and indecisive natives. All the natives threw away their weapons and armor, and charged into the distance without looking back. Amidst the thick black smoke and dancing flames, the originally black mass of natives were like hornets that had their nest blown up, shrieking and fleeing in all directions. The entire battlefield was in chaos. They did not know where their tribe was, nor did they know where the retreat camp was. All they knew was that they were desperately trying to get away from the terrifying, ferocious demons and the enormous metal dragon that was charging forward. At this point, there was no longer any meaning in defending the same spot. All the goblin chariots, goblin airships, and the magic machine golem dragon rushed out of the defensive formation and began to chase after the little ants that were running around. The low-level crimson sorcerers targeted the scattered dragonids, while the Grade 2 crimson sorcerers targeted the Grade 1 little dragons that were flying around in the sky. As they retreated in panic, many of the giant dragons were either panicking or injured, and gradually separated from the main group. The Grade 2 Crimson Sorcerers that had the ability to fly were indescribably excited, and they hunted down the fleeing giant dragons in a frenzy. One side was determined to break out of the encirclement, while the other side was blinded by greed. When the two sides collided, sparks flew even more fiercely and wildly. In the sky, the intensity of the battle was even more intense and terrifying than when the giant dragons had launched a large-scale attack. Finally, after a bitter battle that lasted for 7 hours, the dragon war in the northern wilderness of Lance ended with the defeat of the giant dragons. There were as many as 34 giant dragon lords trapped in the northern wilderness. While most of them were Grade 1 little dragons that had just matured, there were still 7 Grade 2 and 3 giant dragons. The Grade 3 water dragon Dominic had died on the spot, and the whereabouts of the Grade 3 shadow dragon Outland were unknown. This was a huge shock to all the giant dragons. This group of magi from a high-ranking plane was no longer a bunch of insignificant ants from another world. They were a group of invaders that all the giant dragons feared, but they could not do anything about it. In front of them, the battle tactics that the giant dragons were used to were no longer useful. On the contrary, the lone giant dragons would become the enemy's prey. This huge psychological difference undoubtedly left the giant dragons, who had been invincible in various material planes, at a loss as to what to do. In the past, these noble giant dragons had opened up teleportation portals to other planes on more than one occasion. Relying on their powerful martial strength and flying skills to come and go as they pleased, they had wreaked havoc in foreign countries, destroying one foreign civilization after another. And what they obtained was the huge wealth that was stored in the dragon nest, which was filled to the brim and piled up like a mountain. A pure-blooded giant dragon had close to 10,000 years to live from adulthood to old age. Of this time, 3 out of 5 would be spent in deep sleep, and the remaining 2 out of 5 would either be plundering wealth or on the way to plunder it. As a pure-blooded giant dragon, if it did not fill its dragon nest with wealth and treasures before it reached adulthood, it would not even have the qualifications to attract female giant dragons. It was this successful, plundering, and fruitful return time and time again that made the giant dragons feel that they were the favored children of this world, the high and mighty rulers. The sky was their playground, the earth was their pasture, and everything in the world was just a decoration and a tool used to decorate their territory. Therefore, in the hearts of most of the giant dragons, this world originally belonged to them, but it was stolen by some filthy, weak thieves. And their plundering was just to go out for a stroll, to take back some things that originally belonged to them. Since ancient times, only giant dragons had plundered other planes, but no one had ever heard of a foreign race plundering the giant dragon plane. Therefore, the battle in the northern wilderness had completely shocked all the giant dragons. It made them understand that a barbaric and rude thief, and butcher had invaded their country. And their favorite target of plundering was none other than the original owner of this plane, the dragon race. The flames were still burning. The thick black smoke turned everything within a radius of 10 miles into a world of flying ash. Standing hundreds of meters high in the sky, looking down at the earth, the desolate northern wilderness had completely changed its appearance. On the ground, hundreds of sparks could still be seen burning sporadically, and thick black pillars of smoke rose into the sky, almost covering half of the sky. And in the black scorch marks left by the sea of fire, there were burnt corpses in all kinds of strange postures lying everywhere. Regardless of whether they were strong trolls or thin and weak gnolls, they had now become a pile of unrecognizable charred bones. The dragons had already retreated, and the surviving natives of the plain had also run away without a trace. Therefore, the wizards were the only ones who could continue to move in this field of fire. Goblin chariots drove past the ruins of the battlefield at high speed, and eyeball aircraft skimmed over the ground at an extremely low altitude. As long as a valuable target was found, a group of engineering magic machinery would swarm over, strip and clean them, and throw them into the resource recovery vehicle. This battle had brought great losses to the Wizard Expeditionary Force. More than 700 combat magic machinery were destroyed, 12 goblin chariots were destroyed, and 7 goblin airships were destroyed. As for the other miscellaneous losses, it was even more uncountable. Not to mention the others, even the most precious wizards of the Crimson family had died in battle. Chapter 9:32. Obtained the corpse of a rank 3 water dragon, captured and sealed a rank 3 shadow dragon. 4 tier 2 dragons had been captured alive, and 1 was dead. There were 27 tier 1 giant dragons of various species, 22 were alive, and 5 were dead. 638 rank 1 dragonoid warriors, over 1,000 dragon worshippers, over 3,000 natives of various races. The list of spoils of war was 3 feet long, and this was only a rough estimate. If they wanted more detailed and comprehensive information, the Crimson family would probably have to work for 3 to 5 days just to sift through these spoils of war. After chasing the captives to a safe place to guard them, the Crimson family sent out large numbers of construction machines to retrieve the damaged metal magic equipment on the battlefield. Although many of the metal magic equipment were smashed into metal pancakes by the powerful natives, they could still retrieve large amounts of magic alloys and some rare resources from the wreckage. There was a small production line for magic equipment on the patrol mothership that could retrieve, modify, and take them off the production line. Although the production efficiency was not high, it was enough to satisfy the needs of the patrol mothership. At this point in the war, the Crimson family was starting to run out of strength. Although the magic equipment could be slowly replenished with the patrol mothership, capturing so many dragons and natives at once and bringing them along to challenge the rank 4 giant dragon was a little ridiculous. Moreover, in order to capture the rank 3 shadow dragon alive, Alice had even sealed herself and the giant dragon in a spell formation. This matter could not be delayed for long. Hence, the higher-ups of the Crimson family gathered together for a simple discussion. They felt that they should not force themselves to continue and should return to the Eternal Capital to rest. Hence, after staying in the northern wilderness for 2 days, the Magus Expeditionary Force did not continue north. Instead, the huge fleet turned around and sped back in the direction they came from. As for the large group of natives, the Magus Expeditionary Force did not bring them all away. They only selected 800 strong slaves and warriors of different races that they liked and brought them to the patrol mothership, confining them on the flight deck. This way, they would not slow down the speed of the entire fleet. It took them 23 days to leave and 27 days to return. Finally, after going through a lot of hardships, they could already see the towering spires of the Eternal Capital on the distant horizon. However, just as everyone was indescribably excited, extremely longing to return to the encampment, take a good hot bath, and then sleep comfortably for a few days, the enormous fleet suddenly stopped moving forward. The confused Crimson sorcerers walked out of the chariots and cabins, asking each other for the reason. When the dust stirred up by the caravan finally settled down, the silhouette of a huge dragon appeared in front of them. This was a strangely mighty and beautiful giant dragon. His entire body was covered in light purple scales. From afar, he looked like a naturally grown amethyst, sparkling and translucent, beautiful beyond compare. On its majestic and ferocious body, magical gems could be seen embedded in its scales. Under the warm sunlight, this 17-meter-tall, 35-meter-long gigantic dragon's entire body flickered with fluorescent light, giving off a dazzling, illusory feeling. A grade 4 amethyst dragon. The Crimson sorcerers present were not rookies on the battlefield for the first time, and they all had some understanding of the targets set by their family's first sorcerer expedition. Therefore, with just a single glance, the Crimson sorcerers knew who was blocking the front of the caravan. It was the grade 4 amethyst dragon that they wanted to fight and challenge the most, Toriel. Even if they had not seen it with their own eyes, they could easily guess how terrifying a grade 4 dragon was. Therefore, the Crimson sorcerers immediately went back into the goblin chariots or airships, activated the force field protection and prepared for the upcoming fierce battle. As the leader of the team, Grim naturally had to stand on the front line. With a loud bang, a ball of flames burst, and Grim appeared on top of the magma golem dragon's towering head. The magma golem dragon raised its neck and let out a deep roar. It took large strides, pushed through the crowd, and slowly came to the front of the team to face the amethyst dragon. In the command cabin of the magma golem dragon, the old goblin Dinganga was jumping up and down in excitement. He swept away the goblin operator and lay on the image of the amethyst dragon transmitted by the monitoring crystal. He was indescribably excited. A Tier 4 dragon. This is a bona fide Tier 4 dragon. Only by defeating it can our magma golem dragon be considered a real grade 4 magic machine. Otherwise, it can only bear the humiliation of being a fake grade 4 magic machine. All of you, buck up and perform well. Don't let our magma golem dragon lose face. Yes, yes. As the magma golem dragon was a combination of sorcerers and magic machines, its control was actually carried out by both the shaman spirits and the goblins. For the time being, the Crimson family could not find a powerful shaman spirit that could match the magma golem dragon's powerful physique, so they could only replace it with many smaller shaman spirits. Therefore, the shaman spirits were only responsible for the control and linkage of the magma golem dragon, while the demonized goblin technicians and operators gave the shaman spirits battle orders. Yes, after spending so much time with the magma golem dragon, even the green-skinned goblins could not help but show some signs of demonization. The magical energy that filled the internal pipes of the magma golem dragon caused the green-skinned goblins to mutate. Their originally green skin turned dark green, their muscles became stronger, and sharp claws grew on their hands and feet. In addition to their strong bodies and fast movements, the demonized goblins also became excited and radical. They could easily fall into a state of violent agitation when they encountered something. After the wizards studied the mutation, they didn't find anything that would harm their minds, so they just let it be and didn't bother with it. However, although these demonized goblins were crazy, they still understood that everything was in the hands of the sorcerers. Therefore, they were still very respectful to the sorcerers of the Crimson family, not daring to disobey them. Grim stomped his foot and quickly transmitted his voice. "Ganga, behave yourself. Don't do anything without my order." The old goblin Ganga, who was acting crazy just a moment ago, immediately shivered and stood at attention. He said loudly, "Don't worry, master. We will definitely listen to you. Your loyal servant Ganga awaits your order." Grim nodded in relief and shifted his gaze to the grade 4 amethyst dragon, blocking the way. No matter how one looked at it, the grade 4 amethyst dragon was perfect and beautiful. The magnificent body didn't seem like a living creature of flesh and blood at all. Instead, it seemed like an extremely exquisite work of art, and it seemed exceptionally intoxicating and infatuating. "Are you Lord Toriel?" Grim asked in a deep voice. His voice was not loud, but under the vibration and resonance of the powerful flame energy, it was so grand, so shocking. The amethyst dragon that had been motionless finally moved. It stretched its slender and elegant dragon neck, and a pair of colorful eyes looked at Grim from afar. Grim's heart sank. An indescribably powerful spiritual pressure came crashing down on him. If he hadn't reinforced himself with mental and soul protection, he wouldn't have been able to remain unmoving under a Tier 4 dragon's gaze. "Are you the leader of this sorcerer team?" The amethyst dragon finally spoke. Its voice was clear and bright, with a clear and melodious sound of crystals colliding with each other. It made people feel relaxed and happy. However, the majesty of a powerhouse in its voice was enough to make people tremble in fear, and it was difficult to think of going against it. "I'm Grim, the leader of this team, and also the owner of the Eternal City behind you. If you have anything to say, you can say it to me." "Good. Very good." The amethyst dragon's voice turned cold. "You evil sorcerers have intruded into the territory of the dragons and started a massacre. Aren't you afraid of the revenge of the dragons? Grim smiled faintly. It's not like you're a young dragon that just came out of its shell. How can you say such childish words? Don't tell me you dragons have invaded and destroyed a lot of foreign civilizations? Why did he become so angry and righteous when his plane was invaded? If you're here to threaten me, please choose another path. If you're here to negotiate a deal, please show me the attitude you should have. How dare you? Grim's calm tone obviously angered the grade 4 amethyst dragon. It roared angrily, and the crystal wings on its back flapped. The terrifying majesty of a grade 4 dragon was immediately displayed. Grim stared at it coldly, not showing any fear or cowardice. Behind him, all the goblin chariots, airships, motherships, as well as the golem dragon beneath him extended their pitch-black cannons and began to charge, gathering powerful magic energy. The entire fleet immediately became alert, waiting for the order to fire 1,000 cannons. The other magic cannons might not be able to pose any threat to the grade 4 amethyst dragon, but the golem dragon and the few giant cannons that extended from the mothership caused it to frown. It could vaguely sense a dangerous aura. Looking at the team of sorcerers that looked like a porcupine, the grade 4 amethyst dragon could not help but ponder. Finally, the amethyst dragon retracted its wild attitude and looked at Grim once more. Human Magus, I'm not here to fight today. I'm here to negotiate and trade. When it said the word trade, the amethyst dragon gritted its teeth and its tone fluctuated. Oh, I wonder how you intend to negotiate and trade? A sincere smile appeared on Grim's face, and he asked passionately, "You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."